And we're live for episode 47 of the Wake Up podcast. And today I have brilliant thinker. I've got ex-Wall Street guy, founder of Liberty Blitz, Bitcoiner, father, husband, gardener, spiral dynamics dude, Michael. Am I pronouncing this right? Krieger or Krieger?
It's Krieger.
Krieger. Okay, sweet.
Like Liberty Blitz Krieger.
Liberty. Okay, dude. Thank you for coming on, man.
You got it. Very excited to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while.
I want to talk about spiral dynamics, but I want to leave it for a little bit later. So I want to first actually start off with a little piece that I read from you, and I think it's a little bit more recent than your original spiral pieces, which is around the theme of localization and decentralization. So I want to talk about that and kind of the contrast between the idea of global connectedness versus globalism, which I think people conflate all the fucking time, right? So for me, when I think about Bitcoin, I think about localism that has the benefit of global connectedness versus the sludge that is fucking globalism, which is, about rule from one set of morons and applying it in some homogenous capacity to everyone else. So let's maybe we'll start with some definitions of localism, decentralization, what those words actually mean to you, because they get thrown around all the time, particularly decentralization. I fucking almost hate that word now, but let's dig into those.
Okay, so let's start with globalism, right? So let's just say we were, born yesterday, and but we have some intelligence and we understand certain things. And you heard the term globalism, it would sound good, right? It would sound like a great thing. We're finally able to connect with each other across the world through technology. We're able to appreciate the history of other cultures, right? People travel more than ever before. They understand essentially that there's a bigger world outside of where they grew up. So it would sound great, right? Oh, globalism, yeah. I mean, that's where humanity should be headed. And I think, unfortunately, though, it's one of those words that's been taken away from us that we probably can't reclaim at this point. But it's been taken away in the sense that what it means when we use it pejoratively, which is how most of us use it, at least Bitcoiners and people that think similarly to us, is it's essentially corporate control. So I don't know if you saw this, but it's really disturbing. Matthew Green, do you know who he is? He's like a professor of cryptography at Johns Hopkins. Yeah, so he was talking about what Apple is planning on doing, where it's basically they're trying to run around encrypted photos on your phone, where they're going to basically be scanning your photos to look for child porn on your phone, right? And this got me thinking, because this could be a huge attack to any dissident, because then they can just say, well, you got a shady photo on your phone and just arrest anybody, based on this like opaque thing. Not to get too much in the weeds in that, although everyone listening to this should look up his thread because it's so important. But what it got me thinking was just this exact concept I'm talking about, and the perniciousness of what globalism really is, which is, let's say Apple does this and it has such a huge share of the smartphone market. You can't leave, right, the US and escape Apple. Your iPhone and what they're doing to it, or what they may be doing to it, follows you everywhere. And then any government anywhere can exploit that vulnerability to then challenge you or frame you, for example. And so this is, to me, where the perniciousness of what globalism has come to mean is. It's this idea, essentially, that there's no sovereignty that an individual or even community or even a nation state has anymore. The sovereigns are essentially mega corporations and the individuals, oligarchs who run them. And then, of course, these strange global bodies like the WEF that essentially, it's pretty clear, give the memes and the narratives to the local governments to then execute. So it's really this idea of it's anti-localism, right? It's anti-community sort of deciding their own affairs. It's like that Chesterton quote, which I love, which is like, you have to keep your politicians close enough so you can kick them. That's like the opposite of that idea. So that's
Mhm.
what globalism has means, right, in practice. Practically speaking, that's globalism. And, you know, increasing numbers of people are horrified by it, recognize the threat. And most importantly, what happens is when you get wrapped into this, right, it's so hard to get out of it. You know, and like with smartphones, for example, how many options do you really have? Who are the two big players? You've got Google and you've got Apple. Both those companies clearly don't have our best interests in mind. And if they choose to go authoritarian, which they are, we're in trouble. So I think, so then to take a step away from globalism, then we're talking about, you talked about localism. And it's interesting because for a long time I had been, and I still feel this way, right? Like no labels, right? I mean, I don't want to be associated with any label for a lot of reasons. One of them is that the minute you do, and I noticed this with libertarian, right, ism in particular, which is why I pretty much always rejected that label, is because you'd see people being like, oh, you're not a libertarian because you don't think this. And I would see that and I would say, well, I don't think that. So I guess I'm not a libertarian, right? And so, but that really sort of applies to anything. You get pigeonholed too much into an ideology as defined by others. And then you stop thinking, you stop questioning because you have this tribal identity. Of course, I do call myself a Bitcoiner, and more recently though, if people demand that I label myself politically, I refer to myself as a localist/decentralist, right? Because they're not exactly the same thing. Localism is a little bit easier to sort of get your head around, in the sense that it's sort of going back to how things used to be, right? Sort of if you rewind history a little bit and take a little bit of complexity out of civilization, it's this idea that people who live in a specific area have a lot of specific unique characteristics, culturally, land-wise, right? And geography is of course important. Right. I grew up in New York City, okay? And your average person when I was growing up in New York City is just horrified at guns, right? Not just horrified, but like cannot, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I
Like
grew up,
Australia, yeah.
I was never like that, but horrified to the point where they cannot comprehend why someone would want a firearm. Right? They're scared of it. It's incomprehensible, but it makes sense, right? Because you live in a very dense place, right? I grew up on the 28th floor of an apartment building in Midtown Manhattan, across from like the United Nations building. You know, having a firearm in this little box that I grew up in, right? I mean, it does seem a little ridiculous unless there's a lot of crime or whatever. So, but then you think, right? You move out. I live in Colorado now, much more rural. And I've seen a lot of America. And I mean, if you live in these rural communities or even ex-urban or whatever, it's completely logical to want to have a firearm. It's completely a way of life, right? Not just for hunting, but just for fun. Why not, right? It's just a tool. And so this is why this is just one issue of why localism is so crucial, because the values and necessities and culture of a place like Manhattan, and the values, culture, and necessities of a place like Eastern Colorado, let's say, which is essentially like Kansas, are completely different. And the concept that a one-size-fits-all approach makes any sense is ludicrous, right? I mean,
It's completely ludicrous, yeah.
Right? So the only people that would ever want that are people that want the power that comes along with something. Right? And so we've sort of digressed, I think, as humans in America. I'm going to say it's probably applicable to the rest of the world, but certainly here, where we're not even fighting about things that sort of, oh, well, this makes sense for us, maybe it doesn't make sense for you. We're fighting just to get the ring of power in DC so we can impose our will on everyone else.
Everyone,
right?
yeah.
Crazy, right? So I think like getting out of that mentality is step number one. Because when you realize that just because you live in a certain place and have certain values, it does not mean everyone has to share those. It's just not necessary. It's not feasible. And as I know you've written about as well, you need authoritarianism and totalitarianism to enforce something like that, right? To enforce the nonsensical. And what
Absolutely.
people need force and violence to do that. So in any event, so localism to me is sort of realistically understanding that. And like, we're fortunate in the US that we have the 50 states, which historically in the 10th Amendment have some level of sovereignty. And you've seen that being exercised by, in particular, Florida, a little bit more Texas lately, where they're just saying to DC and the CDC, thanks, but no thanks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you see that. But I actually think, as someone that lives in a state that, and New York was the same way, that has very diverse parts of the state, that's not good enough. And I think the most logical way of sort of breaking down governance actually is to the municipal level. So I think the states will play a role, right? States will play a role to push back in this era. But I think ultimately we need to go further down to the municipal level, because the states are too big too. You know, California should be broken up into probably 100 pieces at least to make it livable. And I think the other thing about this is, to me, one of the key things about a localized future would be, there's certain elements about the US I really like. So for example, the fact that a state can be very different from another state, but I could get in my car and move to that other state pretty easily is nice, right? I have to play by the rules of that state, but I can do it, right? We can go back and forth and choose, and that's important, I think. And so if you have, let's say, I forget how many municipalities there are in the US, I think there's around 4,000, something like that. So if you had 4,000 separate entities that did still connect in a way that we connect now, as far as, oh, I can go from here to here to here to here, but they each had more of their own sovereignty and way about
and
them.
flavor.
Wouldn't that be cool, right? Wouldn't it be awesome to just be like hopping around to different municipalities, and each one has its own little vibe, its own way, and then you can kind of pick which one you feel like, and maybe you feel like this one when you're 25, and you feel like you like that one when you're 35. You know, so to me, that's the beauty of localism. And also, if you look around, right, everyone has said this, and I just drove 5,000 miles across the US. It's scary how similar each town is, like the main strip, right? Same gas station, same setup, same soulless sort of feeling, you know, the same fast food chains. That's not normal, right? This is imposed upon us. And I think localism and empowering communities is anti that, right? Is you sort of want to destroy that. And I know you agree with this. I tweeted this the other day that, and I'm, you know, as much a victim as anyone to this, so I'm not trying to pretend I'm like over here, but comfort and convenience are two of our biggest challenges. Like we are as a species so addicted to both of those things that that's what keeps the momentum, in my opinion, of the system going forward.
Yeah, there's a bunch of threads I want to pull on there. Let me just, I'm taking a note here about comfort and convenience because I want to talk about that too. But I think, I'm going to go back to globalism first. Is, you know, when I think about globalism, I wrote an article last year, which was called Equality versus Diversity. And kind of to your point about localism there is, I'm actually for diversity, but real fucking diversity, not enforced diversity. Organic diversity, which can only emerge as a function of, you know, communities aligning around common values that are fundamentally homogenous within, but heterogeneous externally. That's the whole point of fucking diversity. And this is where, like, for me, globalism cannot work because the principles upon which it sits are fundamentally false. The idea that you can apply the same set of rules, the same set of mandates, the same set of ideas to everyone is actually the most anti-diversity thing one could possibly think of. Like, and the only way to do it is to try and enforce some means of like leveling or equality. And here's like, this is a problem that people don't realize is equality cannot be achieved by forcing people upwards. You can only achieve it by chopping people down. It's the only way you can do it. So the path to equality, like I fucking hate that word, is one of basically bringing down the individuals who are effectively the most capable, functional, practical, etc. in their own field, to make us all one homogenous, useless fucking sludge of a species. And so for me, like, that's fundamentally, like, the principles for globalism are wrong. But furthermore, also, I think to your point that you mentioned is about keeping your governors close enough to be able to kick them, right? Is globalism fundamentally removes accountability. I can't fucking do anything to the dude at the WEF, right? Like,
right. And so to sort of add on that, a couple of things. So first of all, yeah, as you say, the other premise that I think we need to redefine a lot of words, okay? And so one of them is success. Okay. Like, I even see a lot of Bitcoiners do this too, and I cringe every time. They're like, if you want to be successful, listen, stop, chill the fuck out. Okay. Sorry. I don't know if this is like a family friendly
go
show.
for it. Go for it. Go for it.
So,
swear as much as you want.
Your definition of success is not my definition of success. Okay.
Absolutely.
Period. End of story. Now, my definition of success might have been similar to your definition of success 5-10 years ago, and it probably was. But now my definition of success going forward is a nice garden, a loving family, freedom, right? Health, but under my own, auspices, of course, not the scientific dictatorship. So these things change. And to your point, the globalism and this sort of bland, homogenous architecture that needs to be built for like this global system to work, it basically makes an assumption that everybody values the same things equally as well, which they clearly don't, right? And you see that just in the fact that some people are hyper risk takers, right? Some people do things that you see and you're like, oh my, you know what I mean? Like, that scares me just watching it, right? But they want to do it. And you know what? When we look at that person, we don't think, oh, the government should stop that. We think like, wow, that person is on a different level, right? I mean, the driving force behind that individual is distinct from me. And I appreciate it, and I love it. And I can also recognize that's not me, okay? But as you say, globalism really tries to take everyone, and as you say, it's not like they're uplifting everybody. They're basically making everyone into like some character in Office Space, right? Like some cubicle drone. Like, that's basically, and then of course the overlords, above, like Bezos flying into space while we're sitting there like filing TPS reports in our cubicles, right? So it's a horrible, it's just an absolutely horrible existence. It's already pretty much, unfortunately, it's already pretty much the existence for most people, I would say, on this planet. And the idea, I think, behind the whole Great Reset is to further lock that in, right? So really, the funny thing, it's ironic. The Great Reset isn't a reset. It's to prevent these guys from the system resetting on them. That's all it is. Like, they're just like, how do we keep this static, right? How do we sort of like freeze frame, like, I am going to be over here in the hierarchy forever, and you're all here forever. And like, how do we
I want to touch on this.
Keep that static, right? So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We really need, your point about diversity is so important, because they do this to people too with like race, right? They always assume, my mom's from South America, that's where I get my dark complexion. My dad's Jewish from Brooklyn, very much a mutt myself. So like, this idea that like all Black people think this, or all Hispanics think this, or all Jews, I mean, and that's what they're constantly putting into your head. If you're a good Jew, you are this way, or if you're a good Black person, you're this. And it's like you get put into buckets, and then you can just be easily managed, and like the strings can be pulled, like, let's see, today we're going to put on this sob story on CNN, and it's going to pull on these heartstrings for this like mind-controlled group, right? It's crazy. And it's like, I think the craziest thing to me is how far along we are, right, in this whole dystopia.
Well, that's the problem with creep, right? Is like, I've got an article which I got a lot of hate for that I wrote March 16, 2020, and it was called Corona Didn't Cause It. And it was like a future pacing article where I said that this is going to be not 2 weeks. This is going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 fucking years, and it's going to be used as an excuse to continue lockdowns, to introduce vaccine mandates. So I laid it all out, and me and fucking McCormack had an argument about it on a podcast, like literally in March for 3 hours, where I was trying to say that this is what is going to happen, and he's like, no, the government needs to do something. That this is only for a short period. I'm like, there is nothing as permanent in the world as a temporary fucking government mandate where but like soon as you hear the government say something like for your safety, run like hell. Like that should be the fucking rule number one, right?
Right. Well, did you see that quote? It's going around. It's a really good one, where they're like, if government can grab power in a crisis, they're going to create crisis.
Exactly. This is what people don't take a moment to understand incentives, and this is where like some people call me conspiracy theorist, but I don't believe in conspiracies. I believe in incentives, and I believe in the madness of crowds and how complex systems with fucked up inputs can completely spiral out of control. So in many ways, I was speaking with Parker Lewis the other day. Actually, we were hanging out in Austin, and I was like, as much as we see how fucked up the world is, in many ways, like, what else would you expect from a system whose monetary base, like the means via which information and human action and energy, time, and resources are actually transmitted through society, when that is detached from reality and it's just a fucking made up concept, like, and that it's issued by a group, what other outcome do we really expect in the world? Like, so when you look at it from that standpoint, when you kind of zoom out a little bit, you're like, well, actually, this is probably a normal behavior for a complex system that has the incentives skewed as such and has inputs that are completely fucking abhorrent to the way nature functions. So in many ways, like, I guess the surreal part is just living through it. But if you kind of zoom out, like on a long enough time scale, this is the logical progression that a species would go through, with having the root fucking operating system of humanity, like money, being so fundamentally broken.
Right. So, okay. So I agree with everything you said. I would just add this, that I'm sort of in the middle, right? Like, there are the people who think everything is a conspiracy, right? Like every single revolution, every rebellion, every single one in history has been perfectly managed up until this point for 2,000 years. Right? No, that's not me. I believe in cycles, right? As you say, humans tend to do things, right? Certain types of humans, sociopathic, power-hungry humans, tend to rise into power in complex societies and then do certain things and wreck things. And, it's that whole cycle of, right, like, weak men, strong men. It's very true. It's very it's one cycle out of thousands of cycles, right? So we're cyclical. We're not so linear. We're more cyclical than we are linear as a human history, in my opinion. But on the flip side, now I want to recommend this book to anyone who hasn't read it, who's watching this, and I recommend it to you if you haven't. So Brave New World Revisited, if you haven't read it. Not Brave New World, which is great, right? But it's fiction. But Brave New World Revisited was written about 10 years later, or actually more than that. It was in the 50s. And this is where Huxley goes through exactly what he thinks, nonfiction, okay? He goes through exactly what he thinks is coming and what we need to do to resist it. Now, some of the stuff he goes into, I disagree with very much, but 80% of it is brilliant. So like he's like a big overpopulation guy, which I'm not. But other than that, what I think is so valuable, and I think you'll find this valuable, is he goes into propaganda techniques that were available in the 50s. So stuff like within advertisement, like how they would just flash a little thing for a second that you put your subconscious is registering, but you don't, right? That's
like in Fight Club.
Yeah, right. That stuff was all happening in the 50s. He goes into the specific propaganda techniques that were used by the Chinese and by Vietnamese in that era. No, not the Vietnam War. I think it was specifically the Chinese with regard to the Maoist revolution and what they would do to the prisoners in the camps and stuff. And I'm telling you, when you read this and you realize the propaganda techniques, the scientific propaganda techniques that they knew about, right? They knew about and were using 60 years ago, right? You'll see that, right? It's not just an accident. It's not just incentives. There's a lot of things going on. And like when you take something like Operation Mockingbird, are you familiar with that at all? Okay, so look that one up too. So Operation Mockingbird was the infiltration of the media, not a conspiracy theory. This is like a well-established fact by the CIA in the United States. And it talks about how certain people, the relationships that the CIA had with mainstream media, and then there's stuff like MK Ultra, of course, which people should look up. That's the mind control program of the CIA. Not conspiracy theory. This is all factual. You can look it up easily. But my point is that, like, if the CIA had infiltrated mainstream media, back to the 70s, right? You don't think that's happened now? You don't think that's still going on? I mean, if you look at CNN, can you honestly say that it's just incentives? Like, or the Atlantic magazine, which is losing millions of dollars a year and just published a piece saying that unvaccinated people should be on the no-fly list, right? I mean, what I'm saying is that what keeps this going, right, for your average Joe, like let's say me on Wall Street, right, when I was full Kool-Aid drinking guy, right, making my money on a trading desk, right, I wasn't part of a conspiracy, right? I wasn't working with the feds. I was just trying to make some money, but the incentives kept me in the game, right? As to your point, right?
Correct. Yes.
The printing press, but I didn't even see it. And so like, I was mind controlled and propagandized, but it was the incentives that was keeping me in that seat, right? It was keeping me in the game. I wasn't part of a conspiracy. But I will just say that I absolutely do believe that sophisticated, I mean, I'm with 100% certainty, sophisticated scientific stuff we can't imagine, right? Because like when I read the stuff that was going on in the 50s, I was like, whoa, it was 70 years ago. So I'm saying that like, the people that know this stuff, right, that have these sophisticated propaganda techniques, and they're probably way more refined then than they are now, it's being used, right? So for example, doesn't it feel like a good percentage of the population, people you even knew, are under some sort of like mass hypnosis right now? It feels like that to me. And it literally feels like some people I know or just see are under some sort of a spell. And I think that is the result of sophisticated mind control techniques that are being employed. And of course the fear thing, right? Like that's well known. Create fear, lower consciousness, which we could talk about with spiral dynamics. Create fear, lower consciousness, exploit, right? Easy. But I think this is forever,
Yeah, look, I think, even behind that, because like where a lot of the so-called conspiracy theories, which many of them are not conspiracy theories, they're just fucking fact, which has been, labeled as a conspiracy theory. I think they still stem though from some form of incentive, and the fact that they stem from broken incentives in the first place result in, because fundamentally, like the word conspiracy it means to think and to act for an outcome. We all do that anyway. Like we all conspire to do something. Like I conspire to build a Bitcoin business. I conspire to do podcasts. Like that's what I do. So there is always a motive and an intention, but the behind the intention is, where the incentive lies. So if I was if we use Amazon as an example, Amazon is actually game theoretically and based on the current rules of the game, playing the cards that any one of us would fucking play anyway, had we been in that position, because behind that, the system is fundamentally fucking rotten, like that there's a cancer in it. So the rest of the cells in the organism become cancerous, and trend towards that thing. So like, I've got to finish this article I'm writing. It's called The Rise of the Technocratic Leviathan. And basically the premise of the article is like that the Googles, the Amazons, and the Facebooks of the world could not have existed in the absence of a framework like monopoly on money and a state monopoly in the first place. Like, that is the only reason they fucking exist, because they're close to the monetary spigot. They're beneficiaries of the public markets and all the inflow there. They don't need to compete once they're large enough. They don't need to compete on value and service. Like, I always use the airlines as a good example. Is the airlines originally, their goal was to provide a service from taking you from fucking A to B. The safety of the flight was important, and the safety of the flight was the pilot's job in the engineer's job. And they would live and die by how many customers they had and who the fuck paid them. Now, the airlines, they don't give a fuck about who pays them or who doesn't. Their job is now to, to deputize the stewardesses to behave like fucking Gestapo bitches and, tell you to like put your fucking mask up. And they don't care how they treat their customers, because if no one pays, they'll just get a bailout. So we have to pay for it anyway. So it's like, it's fucking rotten from the core. And then that creates this, these second, third, and subsequent order effects, which are a complete fuck up. And then, then we wonder why there is, forces conspiring to do particular things. It's like, human nature is predicated upon, self-preservation, and then the self-preservation, extends to, the what's in your vicinity to try and preserve, which in these cases is, the state as an organism, a corporation as an organism, etc.
Okay, great. Okay, so there's two things I want to go with on that. Two places I want to explore. I agree with you, by the way. So to take that a step further in a different realm, right, that I was discussing earlier, you're absolutely right. Because let's take how the CIA came to be in the first place, right? Started with the OSS, then the CIA. Well, what did that come out of? Came out of World War II. What was the result of World War II? A global US empire. Right? So the United States found itself after World War II basically as the strongest country in the world. And it consolidated that power in an ostensibly benign fashion at first, and perhaps it was. But very quickly, as you say, when there's that kind of concentrated power, global power, there's going to be people who rise up and say, well, we're going to preserve this at all costs. And how are we going to do that? I'm going to be part of that. And so then you get the intelligence agencies. And out of the intelligence agencies, then you get bigger and bigger Leviathan, and it grows upon itself. And then you got fiat money put on top of that in 1971, and it creates the bigger blob and a bigger blob and a bigger blob. And that's exactly right. There was that first incentive, which was global empire, and the sorts of incentives that leads to, which giant intelligence agencies is one of them, unfortunately, right? And then it just keeps going. And I always like to say that the US was an industrial empire right after World War II. And the most important thing about 1971 was that that's when the US became a financial empire. And that's what we are today. I mean, the US is basically just like this like Wall Street trading paper tiger on leverage, right? I mean, it's literally. And so that's why it's so messed up too, because the incentives, as you say, they were bad after World War II, but then they got a million times worse after 1971. And now we're at the point where it's just such a fake, phony economy, and the biggest crooks and criminals and psychopaths are on top because of what you say. That's what's going to happen, right? It's like a math formula. You put these things and you create the system like this. And of course, we're going to end up exactly where we are every freaking time, right? Every time.
Yeah.
But this sort of goes further. So the only thing I take exception with was that we would all act like Jeff Bezos. Like, I don't think you would. I definitely wouldn't, right? Like, I don't have that in me. Like, I'm not trying to conquer the world with business. I don't want to be a billionaire. I just fundamentally don't, right? That's me. I'm not, I'm being, a lot of people are, but I'm not. So I'm never going to be that guy, right? Never. Like, it's not because I don't, it's for a lot of reasons, but the main one is I don't want to be that guy. Okay. But a lot of people, you're right, do want to be that guy. More importantly though, that guy will always exist. Right? So if the incentives exist, someone will fill that void. That is Jeff Bezos, right?
Correct. So Yeah. So maybe just to qualify, so I 100% agree with you. To qualify that then is anyone in Jeff Bezos' shoes would mean that someone who actually built a large scale business,
Right.
to build a large scale business, you need to be a driven motherfucker. You need to be ruthless. You need to be all of that. So you have that propensity that when you combine that with
Yes.
a system that is broken, that's what happens. But if you combine that with a system that is actually has the specter of economic reality there, where the larger you grow, you can't fund yourself by being close to a monetary spigot. You have to remain providing value and services. Actually, Amazon would have been the greatest gift to the fucking world on a Bitcoin standard, for example.
Well, also don't forget, right? A lot of this stuff, including Amazon, right? I mean, they don't pay any taxes, okay? Whereas we do. A lot of these companies, including like phone companies, telecommunications, right? This stuff was like, they were granted, right? The lines to optic cables. It's not like it's this all free market thing. There's so much of the success of these companies to get where they are has also been subsidized intentionally by the state. So yeah, it's all this mess up. But just to take it then a little bit over to like Bitcoin for a second, this is what first got me so jazzed up, right? Like I always say, when I first learned about Bitcoin, I couldn't sleep for like 2 weeks. Like I literally couldn't sleep. I was just like, yeah, you know, like what the hell? Like this is the biggest change, you know what I'm saying, right? But like one of the reasons was this whole concept of rules without rulers, which is still fundamental because as you say, the way the sort of human paradigm has worked, as far as like recorded history that we know of, it consists of concentrating power as humans develop a civilization, complexity, and the cycle goes and goes and goes, just like it happened to the US, right? Where we rebelled, or our ancestors rebelled in 1776. And now we're the evil empire that we revolted against. Happens every
Exactly.
time. How do we break this cycle? And to me, when I saw Bitcoin, I was like, this philosophy breaks the cycle, right? The entire 100%. Way that it works is a cycle breaker. And to meld, and you're gonna like this, but to meld spiral dynamics and Bitcoin, I actually like to think that Bitcoin is a yellow pill, because I think—
fucking thank you. Yes.
It's a yellow pill. Because what happens is, and I've seen this already. Now, for me, and a lot of people will not understand what I'm about to say, but that's okay. You'll have to go do some reading. But most Bitcoiners, in my experience, are either orange or yellow for the most part. They're operating within the orange or yellow sort of. And the yellows are obviously the ones that I connect with more. And then the oranges, I'm more just like, okay, you know, whatever. But what I've seen and what I think happens is Bitcoin actually is like a pill that gets people from orange to yellow faster, right? And so that's why I think so many Bitcoiners now are— who is fighting vaccine passports the most from day one? Who? It's Bitcoiners, period. Like, no question. Like, we are so skeptical, we're so aware, we're so into doing our own research and questioning, right, the narratives we're told. And I really think that the reason is not because they just like Bitcoin on a superficial level. I think that Bitcoin helps people go from first tier consciousness to second tier consciousness, like people that were kind of cuspy, right? And so that's an interesting thing.
I'm so glad you said that. Like I'm halfway through writing an article, which the whole premise of the article is literally that, is Bitcoin is our tool to move humanity into the yellow layer. It is the ultimate fucking tool. That's it. Like, fuck. Okay, I do want to get into that, but I want to save it for a moment.
Yeah.
I just want to mention something that I pulled a note when we were talking about localism, and you mentioned like the idea of localism is sort of going back to the way it used to be. And I think people sometimes might misunderstand what that means. They're like, oh yeah, but we're not going to go back to the way it used to be. The world is a different way now. But what I want to make a point here is that it's not about going back to being, you know, hunters and gatherers. Like the reason localism has kind of the sense of the way it used to be is because it's natural and emergent. It's like it's bottom up and it grows. Like, you know, values are emergent and people naturally align around tribes and communities. That is perfectly fucking natural. And it is how things form in the first place, as opposed to this sort of trying to force top down people to behave all the same. And so it's not really about going back to being hunters and gatherers. It's realigning with the natural emergent phenomenon of communities, you know, being created around common values and principles. And there's nothing fucking wrong with that, but we can do it now in a more technologically advanced way and be globally connected without being globalist.
Exactly. And so like, let me give you an analogy. So to me, globalism, like, it's not evolution, right? Globalism in the way that it's being pushed on us. It's sort of like if you take food supply, which is something that I care about a lot, right? I love growing. I love growing stuff. So monoculture is globalism, right? Like monocrop and Monsanto. That's globalism, right? It's fields of corn, as far as the eye can see, and then fields of sugar beet, as far as the eye can see, and a complete graveyard of insects and flowers and butterflies, because they're all killed from pesticides. Whereas localism, emergent localism, decentralization, global connectivity plus localism is like permaculture, right? Permaculture is this idea of sort of integrating what's there, where you live, in a environment where, you know, the different species are interacting in a harmonious way to create food and a pleasant environment. And so, you know, that to me is what it is. So for example, like this whole concept of uniformity, lack of diversity, homogenous, you know, scientific, oligarchic rule from the top for everybody, is the equivalent of like a giant field of corn sprayed with Roundup, you know. And I'm sorry, that's not progress. That's a complete sterile, disgusting, horrible existence. And that's, and then here's the thing, right? Like a lot of people are saying, and don't get me wrong, they're trying to like make it 10 times worse. But I think a lot of people fail to realize how far gone we are, right? And I think that's partly why localism is so crucial, because we're so far gone that we're not going, you're not going to vote your way out of globalism, right? You're not going to vote your way out of authoritarianism. Like they're not going to give you that, right? Like a tyrant's not going to be like, oh, whoops, got to pack my bags up. No more vaccine passports. You voted. That's childish, right? It's not happening. So we need to, what attracted me to localism, one of the things was this understanding that, you know, I need to take some action where I can take action. And that's one of the ways you can do it, is like this whole homesteading and localism movement. And of course, Bitcoin is the same sort of thing. You know, it's taking responsibility and also rejecting, right? Because it's important. It's important to flat out
it's
say,
like judo, it's both.
Yeah, I reject this. I will not live like this. Okay, it's unacceptable. It's anti-human. It's anti my soul. And I'm going to figure out a way to not live like that. Okay. And so in a lot of ways, my whole, you know, purpose, you know, right now is to live in a way that I'm rejecting as much as I can, and in steps, right? It's hard, you know, it's hard. It's hard. You can't do it all, right? Like I'm using an Apple computer right now, even after what I said about what they're doing, what they plan on doing with the phones. So yeah, like this is the thing. I mean, and so many Bitcoiners get it, which is great, right? This is why we you know, we such an affinity for one another. It's like the thing that gives me optimism a little bit is it's so simple, right? I mean, there's so much low-hanging fruit. It just takes like one thing to snap you out of it, right? And the good news is once you really get it, right? Once you really get it, you don't go back. You can't go back.
Yeah, I think what you were just mentioning there in the beginning of that piece was, I think I've seen this on your Twitter. It's like we're not entering a dark age. We've been in a dark age, which is effectively that. Like people, you know, we're lying to ourselves, thinking that you know, the worst is yet to come. No. Like we're right in the fucking trenches. You know, we're in here. Like look around, dumb motherfucker. Like, you know, this.
Yeah, yeah, we're fully in Plato's cave, like as a species, right? Fully.
And this is where like I saw someone tweet something about like, you know, Bitcoiners need to sort of like evolve now and, you know, start to like this is where like I love Rob, but he pissed me off with his whole BitClout thing. And, you know, then when he came out with his like you know, the response on Substack, I was like, fucking no, man. Like we now is one of the most important times for Bitcoiners to remain as intolerant and intransigent. Fucking, I can't even say the word. Anyway, it's the most important time to behave like that. Now's not the time to start fucking being kumbaya and be, you know, nice and accepting and all that sort of stuff. We're right in the middle of the fucking dark ages. That's not the time. There's a time to rest, and you know, this is wartime at the moment. And I feel like people kind of take that way too lightly. And one of the things I love about Bitcoiners is that, you know, they don't take that lightly. You know, and that's why we were the first ones to latch onto the potential downsides. Like I remember there was like, I mean, I don't think you and I were connected at the time, so I don't know what your position was early 2020, but there was literally me, Francis Pulio, Seyfedin, and Giacomo Zucca like yelling and screaming in, you know, February, March, saying that this is a fucking disaster, going into lockdowns, but it's going to lead to this. And everyone called us out as fucking neo-Nazis or whatever other fucking name they gave us. So like, we're in the war.
You know, this is a good time to sort of come, you know, I don't know if come clean is the right way to say it, but to be honest about sort of my history on this. So in the beginning of it, I was a bit hysterical. Okay, I'm gonna be completely honest. Like I was a bit like, oh, look at the cases, look at it. And the reason is, right, well, fear did get a hold of me a little, but mostly, here's what I thought, right? I had been writing for years before that China and the US were essentially in a state of war, right? And so when I saw this sort of stuff coming out and it was from China and the lab and all that, I assumed it was a bioweapon. And I thought that it was a bioweapon, we were in biowarfare, okay? So I thought that we were in biowarfare, and therefore, because I didn't know, I needed to be careful, okay? I snapped out of it pretty quickly. But if you look back at I mean, I was early like, oh, this is a real thing, but I was also a bit hysterical for a couple of months. What really got me, I got out of it quickly though, but what got me out of it was the first bill that they passed in the US, if you recall correctly. And it was a total coup. It was like—
Which one was it?
It was the COVID bill. It was like that COVID relief bill, and it was a—
okay.
It was a Wall Street. It was another Wall Street giveaway, and that's what woke me up in the first place. If you know my history, like that's why I left the industry. Like I saw that first bailout and what they were doing, and I was like, this is the biggest scam. This is a total coup d'état. And then so when I saw that with the COVID bill, I was like, okay, this is just another coup, right? That's what this is. Right? And so then I knew, and then since then I've been pretty good. But I agree. I mean, there were a few people, and you clearly were one of them, and we were not connected, that were earlier. Another guy who's not a Bitcoiner is Adam Townsend. He was very good as well. I don't know if you've ever seen his stuff, but he was also right in the beginning being like, this is wrong. Like, you know, he would see China videos and be like, wait a minute, like, is this like people collapsing in the street there? Really? Is that really happening? Like, is this a psyop? And I wasn't as skeptical as I should have been in the first couple of months. But I write
like the thing about that though is so there's another heuristic, which is between kind of like November, December, January, a lot of Bitcoiners were actually more cautious. They went out and purchased masks. They purchased things like that. Yeah. So they were actually ahead of the curve, and they were like, there might be something here, and we need to be ready. And so for me, what I found was that like people were ready. So even like in February, I was still cautious. Like I was in Bali. I was scheduled to fly back to Europe. I wasn't sure what was going on. So I mean, I'm still like, because I've studied health for so long and all of that sort of stuff, like one thing that I do know specifically is that, and nobody seems to talk about this, is virality is inversely proportional to severity.
Right.
So the more viral something is, the less severe it is.
Right.
And you know, when they were talking about how quickly it was spreading, I was like, yeah, this might just be another fucking flu. So I wasn't too concerned about me personally. And I ended up, funny enough, I got fucking COVID on the way back to Europe.
Right.
And like, I never get sick. Like I'm immunologically very fucking strong. And I got smashed for 5 fucking days. I was like, man, this is not normal. Like I was hammered. But you know, ginger, sweating it out, lemon, bit of fasting, and some fucking bone broth, and I was good in 5-6 days. But after that, then I started like seeing what for me, I think the trigger was the fact that the government came in with lockdown mandates. That's where my fucking head blew off, because I got stuck in lockdown in Germany with some fucking social justice warrior psycho bitch that I met on Tinder. So I was stuck in the fucking house with her for 2.5 weeks. And that like it radicalized me very quickly, man. In 2 weeks, I was like the most anti-COVID guy on the planet, because all I saw was this chick at home. She got $5,000 from the government. She was getting money from her family. And her position was, we should lock down the whole fucking world because that's what, and I was like, wait a minute.
Because she's going to be just fine, right?
Exactly. I was like, how do we pay for things? Oh, she's like, doesn't matter. The government will pay for it. I'm like, so where do they get the money from? I don't know, but that doesn't matter. I was like, you fucking idiot. Like,
yeah. It's like, it was a good excuse for privileged people to be lazy for a while. Yeah, look, I mean, there were a lot of steps along the way that made me realize, I guess what I'm saying, like for me, it's just been, with each passing month though, it's been more obvious how this is just a pure power, right? Like, and the struggle I have now is that, I mean, I don't waste too much time with it just because it is what it is, but I mean, it is so obvious. Like it is so obvious now what is going on and what this is about, that it's actually hard for me to understand how anyone can't see it, right? Like, I mean, like that's why I said earlier about the hypnosis thing, like the mind control. Like there's something that, and it's mostly fear related, right? I mean, when you get to the bottom of it with a lot of people, it's that. And then there's the psychology of, I think subconsciously, there is that segment of people that rush to get the vaccines without doing any research, right? Like none, right? Most people got it without any research, right? And then now that people are getting sick, right, and infected or whatever that are vaccinated, it's obviously waning or it never worked in the first place. I think there's this like drive to get everyone in the same boat as them, right? Like you're going to do it too, right? Even if it's actually, you know what I'm saying? Like, even if they know it's kind of not really working, they don't want to be the only ones to have it. Like, you must have it now too. I'm like,
putting a spiral dynamics lens on it. It's one of the pathologies of a blue, right? It's like you have done something, you know, the rule that this is it. And one of the problems, and this sort of is related to the Overton window, is when you slowly, when you take a position, and then you slowly augment that position a little bit, what ends up happening is people's identity is tied to the decision that they've made. And now to like backflip now, after 6 months or 9 months or 12 months of thinking that this is for real, people don't have the courage to backflip on that. And you've got morons that have been so loud that have been proven wrong. Like Taleb is the perfect example. Arrogant, ignorant, selfish, and he was evidently fucking wrong, but he won't admit it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see that to take it into spiral dynamics again. It's the absolutism of those first tier memes, right? I mean, that's the characteristic of them. They're like, whatever the meme that they're resonating with, they are correct, right? Everyone is wrong, and they want to impose their meme or their worldview on you, right? Whereas second tier thinking is about, okay, that's a blue, that's a red, that's an orange, that's a green. They're all fighting. They're all crazy. You know, I get a little bit of what all of them are saying, but I'm not going to, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't need to impose that on you. And I think this is like the key thing, which really helped me when it comes to spiral dynamics, is that to be able to understand that there's a little bit of blue in you, right? There's a little bit of red in you. There's a little bit of orange in you. There's a little bit of green in you. There's a little bit of it all, right? Whereas like people that are primarily within one of those first tier memes cannot see that, right? They're just in that meme and they're like, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. It's like Democrat, Republican. It's the same thing. It's like, how ridiculous is the concept that a nation of 330 million people all fit into two stupid categories?
Yeah.
Right? Preposterous.
The most moronic thing in the world. Yeah.
Ridiculous. And the fact that so many people accept that as like a guiding principle of politics, like, oh man, like we are just in such a mess.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I wanted to tell you my story of how I got into spiral dynamics, but before we do that, I want to touch on three quick things, still pulling from the previous threads, and then we'll go straight into spiral. So you mentioned comfort and convenience, which did you read either the Jordan Peterson article that I did or the Utopian Dystopias?
So the article that you sent me, an article from January, right? Is that the one you're talking about? Because I read that.
I think so, Utopian Dystopia. So it had the Aldous Huxley quote at the beginning.
Did it? Okay, I'm not sure if that's it. I could check. But whatever you sent me, it was written in January, I think, of this year. It was great. Yep. And I've not read the Jordan Peterson one.
Okay. So in there, like I talk about comfort and convenience is kind of like, it's something that humans aspire towards, but it's a low level need in terms of like whether you look at through the lens of Maslow, through the lens of spiral, through Tony Robbins' work with certainty, uncertainty, the 6 human needs, whatever. Like it's something that we need, but it's a low level need. And I think what we do as human beings is we as we innovate, as we create progress, we design things to be more convenient and more comfortable, right? Like so it's more efficient, and that's perfectly fine. The problem arises when that is the number one requirement. Yes. Because when that happens, it is essentially diametrically opposed to growth, because growth only occurs in the realm of discomfort. Like, the idea of a comfort zone, right? Like, where do you grow? You need to go outside of the comfort zone. What is outside of the comfort zone? Discomfort. It is not fucking convenient to grow. It is not convenient to learn. It is not convenient to evolve, to adapt. And this is where I think, we live in a fucking upside down world today. Health is stay at home, watch Netflix, eat fucking Uber Eats, and stay in the dark, right? Like, completely fucking backwards. But that's a function of having prioritized comfort and convenience. So I don't know if you got any additional thoughts on that, but I just thought that was a really important point to pull out.
Yeah, I read that. That is the piece I read. Yeah, it was very good. And so, right, I completely agree. It's again, to me, if you think about it from a spiral dynamics standpoint, right, then the number one, the base layer of the spiral is beige, which is literally like the primal needs of survival. And so if you think about what's happening now and the reason why the mass hysteria is still entrenched and why people are willing to do things, ridiculous fascistic things now in the name of fear, is because so many people have been brought to that first level. Like people who were resonating on blue or orange or green are now at beige for the most part. Why? Because they're fear. Right, because their instinctual survival mechanism is triggered intentionally, right? I mean, that's the crazy thing. Like, it's not even realistic for most people to be that triggered. If you look at the stats, right, it makes no sense at all. Yet, through mass hypnosis and propaganda, you have at least probably 50% of the population now probably resonating at like the most base level of the spiral. So they're at the consciousness level of like a hunter-gatherer who's afraid that a bear is going to kill him every day, Whereas
Literally.
there's no reason to be there. It's artificial.
Or a fucking baby or a 2-year-old. Like literally, I think it's probably
Well, they
more
are.
accurate because at least the hunter-gatherer had the balls to like fucking stab something.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So that's the crazy thing, right? And like, I don't know if you read that article. Well, my second in the series on spiral dynamics, I talk about this. I actually warned it. I said it was in 2017, and I said the goal is going to be to intentionally get people down the spiral.
Down 100%.
Yep, and you got to be careful not to let it happen to you, because the further you go down, the easier you're manipulated.
Absolutely. Well, I love that. I love the model. So couple other points. As you were talking, I just wrote this when you were talking about municipalities and localism. So the note is the municipality has to have the most power, then the city, then the state, then the nation. And at the moment, it seems like it's the other way around, which, you know, we're seeing the effects of that. So I wonder, like, when we as Bitcoiners and, you know, sovereign individuals, etc., as the world is transforming, like this decade's going to be a fucking mess, but I believe that the next decade is going to be where we have the opportunity to build a new foundation. And I think that piece there, and I might even write something about this, is that the power needs to concentrate around the small community first. That's what has the ultimate say on things, and then they can connect themselves into city formats, into state formats, into nation state formats. But the power needs to be there. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I've written a piece on this, and I'll send it to you after we're done. I think you'll love it. So it's all about that. And what I do is I break it down from like the very basics. Okay, so I'll sort of try to summarize. Living sort of in a civilization or complex society or whatever today should work this way. Okay, at the most base level of sovereignty, right, is you, right, the individual. Okay, and then if you want to give up any of that sovereignty, it should be very conscious and voluntary. Okay, so what's the first step out of yourself? The first step is family. Okay, that you choose. So I have chosen my wife, right? And my wife and I have chosen to raise children. Okay, that's a relinquishment on my part, a very conscious and willing one of some of my sovereignty, right? Because I'm saying I am willing to compromise on certain things that maybe I wouldn't compromise on before. I am certainly willing to sacrifice in the most intense ways for my children and my family. And that's fine, right? That's all good. But I'm not this sovereign individual anymore. I am a family unit, okay? And that takes precedent over me and my desires, willingly, okay? So then beyond that, there might be the neighborhood, right? Certainly the town, the city, right? But these choices should be voluntary, right? Like you should, and when you have a lot of municipalities working sort of independently, you have the ability to make it voluntary increases dramatically, right?
Competition.
So, exactly. So for me, I lived in New York City. That was not a conscious choice, right? I was born there, okay? Then I did move back, right, to make a little cash, but I was born there, okay? And when I became close to 30, I made a voluntary conscious decision that this is not the municipality I want to live in, right? It's not my kind of people. It's not my kind of culture, right? Like I could sort of see, you notice how New York was the first to do the vaccine passports? Didn't surprise me, right? As a New Yorker, it surprised me because I know what the people are like there now. I know what that city has become. I saw it sell its soul over the course of my lifetime. So I'm not surprised. So my choice to leave was smart because I knew I could see the writing on the wall a decade ago about that place. And so I left and I decided to embrace a new municipality. And now, by the way, we're thinking about leaving this one, right? Because there's certain signs that are concerning. And so there's a beauty though, that I can now say to myself, okay, where's next, right? Is it going to be Texas? Is it going to be Idaho? Is it going to be South Dakota? Is it going to be Missouri? Is it going to be Tennessee? Is it going to be Georgia? Is it going to be South Carolina? Is it going to be Florida, right? That's an awesome choice that I can make. But the point is, I am voluntarily deciding I want to be part of this state or the city or whatever, right? And the flexibility that I have at that level is huge. And so the more, I guess what I'm saying is like, the more it has to be, the more power, right? Concentrated in the sovereign, it should be at the closest, right? At the closest level of choosing that you have. And so at what level do we have no choice? Obviously at like the globalism level, right? We have zero, we don't have a vote, right? We don't have a vote on Apple, right? We don't have a vote on these right? We don't have a vote on Davos. But also at the US level, we don't have any say, right? I mean, that's clear. Like they say we can have a vote, but it's obviously irrelevant, okay? We don't have. And so that's the crazy thing. And I've written a lot about this actually. And in my ideal world, the more complicated it gets, right? So like maybe municipalities vote to be part of a bigger system, which then votes to be part of a state, which then might vote to be part of a country, right? You should always have an out of the bigger system somehow. So let me give you an example. So in my opinion, there's a process to secede from the union in the US, right? There's a process, there's a legal process for a state to leave. But that's not good enough, right? This is where I think the founders of the US made the biggest mistake. If we could rewrite it, I would have it where the states, every single state votes on whether to stay in the United States every 25 years, right? So it's a fluid thing, right? And why would that help, right? It would keep the federal government in check because every 25 years, right, you knew that if you overstepped too much, states would leave. And then you could reorganize, right? So let's say Texas and, right, let's say we're coming into a 25-year vote cycle in 2025. Everyone would be gearing up for it. Like Texas, Florida, all these southern states would probably be like, all right, you know, if you don't step back CDC, if you don't step back DC, we're going to vote to leave. And they know that. Okay, so it provides a sort of a check. So to me,
it's a deterrent.
Right. To me, we can't be. I know a lot of people want to be like, oh, we're just never gonna look. Human beings do this shit, right? We just do. It's just the way things happen, like the cycles. Like we tend to go from a town to a city, to a state, to a country, to an empire. It's just like it's what happens. So the key thing to me is to acknowledge that reality, right? That's what human beings tend to do, and to put giant checks on it. Like the Constitution did put a lot of checks on power, and it lasted, 250 years or whatever. Like it's lasted. It's probably not lasting anymore, but it lasted a long time, right? It was smart. They were smart, right? We need that. But more like bigger checks, bigger, and part of it is stuff like Bitcoin, though, right? A voluntary system with rules and not rulers.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I would add to that though is I think instead of a part of it, I think the most critical element of that is Bitcoin, because the ultimate check on any behavior is actually the economic check. So what one of the reasons, and again, this is part of why no matter what checks the Constitution may or may not have had back in the day, is that the fact that something like energy money, i.e. Bitcoin, didn't exist. So something like, because money was not in the realm of a physical law of the universe, like the second law of thermodynamics or the speed of light, right? You and I can argue all we want, but the speed of light is the fucking speed of light, right? So we can't change that. So because fundamentally speaking, humanity hadn't, energy money had not emerged to place money outside of the capacity for any organization, any group to control. It didn't really matter what checks there were. The only thing that manual checks or wetware checks like human checks would have done was to maybe delay or create some better sort of deterrence, and maybe enable a transition into energy money that was cleaner. But it is what it is. But I think the decay occurs because a bankrupt, fraudulent institution can maintain operation despite being economically erroneous. Like, it is economically irrelevant. Like, if you and I run a business and we lose money every fucking day of the week, we will not be in business very long. Whereas a government, a large-scale nation state, it doesn't fucking matter. They have moral hazard built into their model because they can flip whatever coin they want. Heads they win, tails you and I lose. The cost is borne by the constituents, and what you end up getting, and this is sort of one of my theses about how the world would look like in the future is our relationship, the relationship between the governed and the governors is one of subject overlord. Whereas in the future, I think the relationship that Bitcoin forces, not by decree, but through economic Darwinism, is one of customer service provider. Like when I walk into a restaurant, the owner of the restaurant doesn't spit on me, beat me up, take my wallet, and then spill the food on me. You know what I mean? Like he cares about me, and that is through his own desire for economic existence, not because he's a fucking nice guy. I'm paying him, and that's what we're missing in the absence of the reality of an economic specter like Bitcoin. So for me, I think it's the most important thing. We do not get localism or decentralization without Bitcoin. In fact, a sentient species like humans do not evolve broadly into the yellow without Bitcoin. We do not get through the great filter without Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the fucking thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in the early days of me writing about spiral dynamics, I would often say that Bitcoin is yellow technology, right? So it's second tier conscious technology. Like it had to have been birthed from somebody with like resonating at least at yellow, right? I mean, it's impossible to not have, because it was so advanced in sort of tackling, right, the fundamental problems that we have with incentives, with the paradigm itself. And it was like that Buckminster Fuller quote, which is like, you don't change existing reality by fighting it, you change it by building a whole new system that makes the other one obsolete. And so Bitcoin is like the first sort of like charge, right, into the battlefield of that new world we're trying to create. And yeah, one of the things that really frustrates me to no end, and I really, because I follow some of the localist people and homesteading people, and I like a lot of what they're doing, and I feel it, right? Like that's totally what I'm into. But they're really anti-Bitcoin, a lot of them.
I know.
Yeah, it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because they're like,
what's his name? Joe Norman. Joe Norman's
yeah,
one of them.
And I like Joe, but he's just got this big blind spot with Bitcoin. And it's unfortunate because like he's like barter's great. And I'm like, barter is fine, right? I would do it and I would do it here, right? No problem. I would do it with him. I would trade some milk for something. But the point is this. Let's say, okay, the truth of the matter is he's in New Hampshire, right? So let's say you're, in Maine or New Hampshire, okay? Listen, you're not growing pineapples in New Hampshire. Okay, do you never want to have a pineapple again, right? Like, do you never want to have any good that is from outside your little community? To me, that's not progress, right? You can have, as you said earlier, localism, right? A return to localism and a return to a lot of the base, like our historical ways of doing things, right? Because we're craving that, right? The world is so sterile. We want to feel a little bit, right? We want to feel something, And so, so I get that. But the point is like, Bitcoin is so complementary to localism.
It is, yeah.
Because it allows all of the little nodes of localized communities to then trade.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Like how are you you're not gonna send a cow to someone in Florida. But like, if you want to make a trade, like you could do your own local currency too if you want. You can barter if you want. It's not saying you can't. But if you don't have Bitcoin, by the way, something else, some state CBDC is going to take the role.
It's going to come again. Exactly.
It's going to be there, right? So that's what I don't like. I'm sort of like, you're not the idea that we're going to go back into that, right? Localism and really go back, right? And not be, to me, a world where you're just localist and you're not interconnected is not a great future. That's not the future that I want. I want a localized future with global connectivity and all the beauty that comes with that, right? So
fucking 100%. Like what they're envisioning is basically a reversion to a world which can probably only sustain 1 million or 2 million people. Like it doesn't fucking work.
Well, not only that, people will naturally be like, oh no, I want to trade with Florida. And then they're going to be like, look, how can I do it? Oh, there's this wonderful Fed coin, right? It's like, something's going to fill that void. that void is getting filled. So, and I always say it's so frustrating. Like I have friends that are, that just can't get there with Bitcoin. And I kind of say to them, it's like, what's your plan? You know, they're rolling out the CBDCs, like they're rolling out the digital ID. Like, what are you going to do? Like, if not Bitcoin, what is your plan? We're not going back to barter fully in the world. It's not going to happen. We're not, unless there's like a giant meteor hit the earth or something, right? But like, we're not doing that. Like, that's not the direction of the world. And so, assuming that we are going to be in a digital world where people are using money over computer networks, what is your solution? And you know what? Nobody's given me an answer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Barter is the ultimate regression. It's you know, if we're back to barter, like you said, it's either a meteorite hit the world or Bitcoin failed and the entire world turned into a fucking dystopia in which like we, you know, have none of the connectivity. There's no more supermarkets. There's no more any of that shit. It's all fucking gone.
Right.
And we're trying to like melt down some lead and, you know, grow some chickens.
Well, what would happen in that scenario, which by the way is like one that I am seriously considering, is that it's that concept of like forking, right? That we could, like, this whole decade could be sort of a fork, right? Where certain places, like let's say New York City, it looks like Beijing or something in 2 years, right? It embraces smart city. It's this creepy dystopia, but of course that's not going to be the case in rural Texas, right? I mean, it's not enforceable. It's not possible. And so like you could get the situation where certain percentage of humanity is living in these like weird dystopian smart cities, and then the savages like us are living like outside of that. And but even still, like the savage communities are going to want to trade with each other like via Bitcoin. So it's crazy. Like who knows right what the next decade is gonna be like as we transition. But you know, that's one of the things that I think about sometimes.
Proud to be a savage. Okay, last thing I want to touch on before we get into spiral properly. So you mentioned something before about like static, and I did a talk at Bitcoin 2021 where I talked about the idea of static versus dynamic inequality, and I believe the most natural thing on the planet, the most natural thing in the universe, nature, and everything is actually inequality. There's no such thing as equality. Like that is the biggest fucking scam perpetrated by morons, bar none. What we have is inequality, but what's important is that the current incentives, the current, you know, fiat monetary system, what it enables is a static type of feudalism or a static type of inequality, which if you're close enough to the monetary spigot, you can remain there through regulation, through, you know, through being close to the money, and through being able to socialize your losses and privatize your gains. So what you get is this concentration where the wealth actually moves up. The wealth is mobile and it moves up and it gets concentrated and you don't move down. And because a complex system is a whole, it has to come from somewhere. So, you know, the people at the bottom are actually stuck there. So if you're in Venezuela, if you're in Africa, if you're in any of those places, you actually can't fucking climb. Like the faster you climb, it's like sort of running in oil. Like, you know, you sink. And then what happens is the middle class basically pay for everything and it gets torn apart until the system fundamentally breaks. So that's sort of static inequality. Whereas dynamic inequality, I would argue this is the most important ramification of Bitcoin to society, is that it creates a situation where if you are more intelligent, harder working, you produce more, you create innovation, you add more value, you will get to the fucking top. But you actually can't stay there by socializing your losses and privatizing your gains. So the threat of falling exists. And simultaneously, if you're at the bottom, you can actually climb because you're not burning through the product of your labor through whether it's inflation, taxation, crooked governments, theft, or all the other shit that keeps people at the bottom. So you actually get this 80-20 distribution, which is natural in dynamic inequality, versus the 99.9 versus 0.1 distribution that you get in static inequality. And I think this, for me, like, it's an area, it's a topic that I think literally doesn't get spoken about enough. Is inequality is perfectly natural if it's organic and dynamic, if you can move up and down, and Bitcoin is the specter that enables that. like I call it the ultimate equality of opportunity. There's no other equality of opportunity. You and I are different. Our resources are different. We're born in different parts of the world. We've got different parents. Everything's different. Unless we nuke everybody and turn them all into fucking clones, there's no equality of opportunity. So with Bitcoin, you actually have equality of opportunity in the only thing that counts, which is the means via which we measure human action. So,
right.
Thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. So there's a couple of quotes that I like. One, I forget the guy who said it, but it was a comment that all societies have elites. It's important to change them every once in a while. Okay,
yes.
That's key. Okay, because again, yes, hierarchies are again a part of the natural phenomena of what humans do, and quite frankly, yes, I don't have no problem with it. Like I always say to people, I love it when I encounter someone that's so much smarter than me, so much more competent. I'm like, it makes me feel good, because if I'm the best, then we got problems, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I see a brilliant mind, and I'm just like, yes, like this is great. This makes me feel good. That person's going to go do some stuff. And when someone like that is in the world, nobody's going to be like, oh, I don't want them to have, you know what I mean? I don't want them to have some sort of a pedestal if they want it, or I don't want them to be able to drive things a little bit because, you know what I mean? Because it's doing the good thing. But we don't have that world, right? I mean, this is where I think a lot of the orange people, even in Bitcoin, get it wrong. They look out there and they're like, oh, it's a meritocracy. Oh, let's worship Jeff Bezos. Let's worship Tim Cook and all that. But it's so weird because they understand that the system is fundamentally, as you say, incentivizing the sludge. Yet they celebrate the sludge at the top. It's the strangest thing, right? Like within Bitcoin, though, I agree, within that ecosystem, it tends to work out over time. Like people rise, they fall reputationally and otherwise, right? The other quote I like, of course, is you buy Bitcoin at the price you deserve, you know? Like, anyone that's like truly on the wavelength we're talking about understands, like, you don't begrudge someone that was mining in 2011. You're like, well done, you know what I mean? You saw it before I saw it. Like,
you're a fucking legend, yeah.
Good for you, right? I mean, what kind of person? But that's why it's like all of these like whiny little blue checks who are like, oh, it's not fair. Like they got in so early and they just want to sell it to you at a profit. Like no one in Bitcoin thinks that way. Even if you get in late, right? Like all these new plebs that maybe are in from 2019 or 20, they're not begrudging or jealous of the guys who got in 2011. They're just like, I'm going to stack. I'm in the game, right? So it's a totally different mindset. I agree completely with you. Again, it's like the yellow pill. It's showing a different way of human interaction. It's also showing you what, I don't know if you've read, this Ken Wilber is actually the guy who I mostly followed when it comes to commentary on spiral dynamics. He's the guy I read the most, not Beck and Cowan, who wrote the book Spiral Dynamics, but Wilber. And one of the things, you know, he talks about when it comes to like the green, right? The mean green meme, he writes about that a lot. And that's what we're dealing with now, right? It's these people who are, it's the authoritarian left, essentially. And he's written extensively about why they are that way and why we can't evolve, right? Why their lack of evolving is holding the whole species down, essentially, at this point. And one of the things is this idea of any kind of a hierarchy, right, is an anathema to them, right? It's like, you can't have it, which goes to your point, which just brings everyone down into the sludge level with the overlords. They don't see that though, right? They don't see that. And so the key though, hopefully for me to get through to some of these people is to say, listen, we get it, right? The current hierarchy is sludge, right? We have a sludge sociopathic hierarchy right now because it's not truly a meritocracy, right? It's not organic even. It's totally fake. It's totally based on fraud and fiat money and power and all sorts of other things, right? Favors and nepotism. But that doesn't mean you throw out competence. And so what Wilber writes a lot about is this concept of holoarchies, or this idea of like a hierarchies that organically arise based on true competence. And I think that's what Bitcoiners appreciate, right? And I think sometimes a little bit too much, right? Because they're willing to put certain people on pedestals that shouldn't be on pedestals. And actually, I don't think it's great to put people on pedestals, period. And I don't do it, right? I will acknowledge right, the contributions of people in Bitcoin and say that, this person's done a lot, he's, good work. But it's the deification, I do think, is it's a problem, because we're all humans. We're humans. We're going to disappoint,
Yeah, I mean, I think my problem with deification is people then set the expectation too high. I mean, it's fine to admire, and like, I think admiration is a beautiful thing, because what I think we've killed, and this is another thing that pisses me off. I almost got banned off Instagram for this. So I did a post on Instagram, which was I compared Cosmopolitan in the 2000s and Cosmopolitan in 2020. And in the 2000s, you got 4 pictures of like, so it was like, babes, like actually gorgeous fucking women. And in 2020, you've got like this fat fucking obese one, one with her arms up and she's got fucking hair out her armpits. The other one is like a fucking transgender and shit. I was like, what we've done is we've glorified, we've vilified, the idea of aspiration, admiration, and we've normalized the average. We've normalized fucking moronic. We've normalized lazy. We've normalized fat. And for me, I think we've lost a lot of what it meant to be, aspirational or aspiring to something. Like I went to this fucking gym the other day, honestly, and like in there, like they've got all this shit about we're a non-judgment gym, like, and all the photos are of like fat people and shit instead of like fit people. And then they've got this like thing where it says a lurk or something. I don't know what this word is, and the quote underneath it is, definition of a lurk is, Ricky, who comes into the gym with a bodybuilder singlet on, headphones, and drops the weights. And it's like, so it's like, so they're judging the guy who like trains, but like they're promoting like being a fat piece of shit. It's like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I was like, what kind of a gym is this? So like,
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do like about the Bitcoin community in general is that pushing each other, and like right on, because this idea that we all, which is obviously true, we all have room for improvement, right? Like I have room for improvement a million kind of ways, right? And we kind of push each other to say like, right on, work on it, get it done. You know what I mean? Like get motivated, and for me, what, the interesting thing, it's nothing to do with Bitcoin really. There are a few factors behind this, but probably the best health thing that I've done in the last years, I mean, my reduction in alcohol consumption. Historically I drank a lot, and less of course as I got older, but I mean, now it's very rare. It's like to the point where like weeks will go by and I won't have a single drink, and I'll just be like, I don't even want one, and I find myself feeling so much better. Never that haze, you know what I mean? I hate the feeling of being hungover and stuff. And a lot of people in the Bitcoin community talk about this too, not in a judgy way. And I'm not being judgmental. Trust me, I've drank enough to like kill like several adult humans in my life, and I'm not proud of it, but I have, right? And it's not like I'm like this amazing person now for that, but I will share that, I can share that and just be like, hey, by the way, if you have an inkling that maybe you drink too much, give it a shot to not, and I bet you'll feel better, right? So it's like that pushing each other, sometimes it gets overboard, with like some of the cultish, like food kind of the diet thing, but whatever, I just laugh at it.
The thing is, like, iron sharpens iron, and then it's up to the individual to know what their pace is. The idea of vilifying or making bad the idea that humans should push each other because someone might get offended is literally the pathway to transforming all of humanity into sludge. Basically, it's like, it's being okay with being a loser. Like, and I call it like the plague of the participation award. Like back in school when they started introducing participation awards, even as a young kid, it pissed me off. I was like, how do you fucking get an award just for being there? That's no, the point of the award is to fucking, to excel, to drive, to grow, to try to be the best, not to normalize being the fucking loser. Like it's backwards.
Well, I don't know if this was the case for you in Australia when you were growing up, but one of the things that really disturbed me, Thankfully, my parents never, were smart enough to never go that direction. But the amount of kids on pharmaceutical drugs, I mean, at like 7th grade level, I mean, it must have been half
Way
the country,
worse in America. Yeah.
Adderall, right? I mean, it's nuts. And I always like instinctually was against, like, to me, I felt like what makes me unique and also flawed is the unique chemistry of my brain, right? Like, and of course I could take pills to sort of correct, but then I wouldn't be me,
Correct.
And I
yeah.
that sort of, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people with severe, right, like serious, like psychological problems that maybe medication can help. But I mean, when you're medicating half of a 7th grade class, you got a problem, right? And so if you think about it, it is like Huxley's Brave New World in that sense. Whereas like you have
Soma.
so much, right? You have so, and by the way, and here's the other thing, like I'm not trying to get into like generational bashing of like, sometimes I'm too tempted, but like the parents there, look what you did. You know what I'm saying? Like those are poor little freaking kids. Like you were too damn lazy to deal with your kids, that the teacher came and said, oh, your son needs to sit more still in class. We're gonna medicate them. And the parents were like, yeah, I don't wanna deal with my own kid. So give them pills. I mean, it's disgusting. Honestly, it's disgusting.
It is.
And let me tell you, it makes me mad, right? It makes me really mad. And I was the kid that like always got good grades, and I could get suspended all the time, right? Because I was always talking in class, I was always causing trouble, I was always in trouble.
Same.
Whole life. But I always did well in school too, because it's just memorization. So it was easy. But like, yeah, I was always getting in trouble. And so my parents would have been I should ask them, but I'm sure they were told, like, get that kid some pills. I know that I think my brother was told, teachers recommended it. It started happening even more, like, I am late Gen X, so like cusp of millennial, but like late Gen X. But by the time my brother, who's a few years younger than me, was going, it was like they were just popping pills. All the kids were popping pills. It's horrible.
Yeah, this is, I mean, that's another one of those ramifications of like comfort and convenience being the priority, right? Is that, let's instead of molding to the eccentricities of the individual and allowing them to grow naturally, let's fucking conform them, put them into a box. Let's eradicate the eccentricities and make them easy to manage and deal with. It's fucking disgusting. Like I have a very hard line about that shit, which maybe we'll have to save for another conversation because it's going to go off on a major tangent. But like I have zero fucking room for any of that kind of stuff, because yeah, it is so detrimental to individuals and then society at large. And I think it's one of the primary drivers of like the decay of modern American society in particular, because
and to do it to children, right? Like it's just it's unforgivable. It's totally unforgivable. And let me just, like, on a little tangent, I'm a parent, right? We're about to have our 4th.
Congrats.
I can thank you. I can it's gonna get busy. Like I'm gonna do this podcast and I think 2 more that I promised, and I'm done for like a year or something. Like I'm just but like one of the things I can say, I don't think you have kids yet, right? No. Okay, so you may not fully get what I'm saying, but I'm home all the time pretty much. My wife is home all the time. She does most of the work. But with discipline, right? And things when the kids are acting up or acting bratty. I mean, let me tell you, sometimes you're just like, you want to strangle your kids, right? Because they are just so inconsolable or bratty or whatever. But like, but that's the easy way out, right? Yelling at your children, right? Or just that it's sort of like giving a pill. What I've found is, and I try to do it as much as I can, is like talk to the kid, like, so if my son, he's old enough to understand, he's 5, almost 6. He really understands. And he has certain things, like he gets really emotional sometimes. He gets really, really wound up. But what I find is, like, when that happens, instead of getting really frustrated, right, and just demanding that he stop, which doesn't work, I take him and I say, let's go have a talk, right? And he sometimes now asks me, like when he's like throwing a tantrum, he'll be like, I want to talk, which is really nice. Right? I'm like, oh, okay, let's do that. Right? But it's like, the only reason he does that is because I've been doing this his whole life, right? Since he was little, I've been like pulling him aside, even when he couldn't understand, to talk to him, calm him down. And what I find is it's incredible, because then in those conversations, after maybe like 2 minutes of him screaming or being tantrumy and telling me he hates me or whatever, finally there'll be a breakthrough. And he'll say, like, he'll tell me what's really bothering him, right? He's aware of it. He's very self-aware. And he'll be like, this is what's really bothering me. Like, as an example, he was really frustrated at one point because my daughter now sleeps in the same room as him. And, you know, he likes to stay up till all hours of the night, and she likes to go to bed a little early. And so then he started throwing this tantrum one night, and finally he just told me, he's like, no, Papa, like, this used to be my own room. It was my own room my whole life. I feel like I'll never have my own room again. I mean, he was like emotionally distressed about it. And the only reason I figured that out is because we calmed down and talked. And this just goes to the thing, like, I can just tell, because it's hard, man. Like to in every one of these situations, to like have the patience to, because we're all doing a million things all the time, right? To have the patience to sit down, right, when your kid is throwing a full-on tantrum, and try to be calm and understand, right, to like go into that little brain, right, and try to get where he's coming from. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And that's why I say to people, I'm like, you know what? A lot of people shouldn't have children. And if you think like, if you think for a minute, like, I'm not sure, don't have a kid. Please don't
have them. Yeah.
And people that want to have kids should have a lot of kids. I really think that's the case, because not everyone's cut out for this stuff. I can tell you, like, I am, and I've always wanted it. But it's, if you're going to do it, see, the problem is a lot of people just want to have a mini them, right, for their ego. It's like, I want a mini me, you know, and then you forget about the kid. You're just like, oh, daycare when they're 3 months old, right? Sometimes you have to. And then you just like sort of like relegate responsibility for that little soul to society for, I mean, just don't have kids.
Dude, it's a very conscious decision that I've made. Like, there was a couple opportunities in my life with girls that I, had dated for a period of time, and that like fit what I would suggest, what I would say is my like I have a minimum genetic level. Like, so there's only a particular kind of woman that I would want to spread my seed with, and she needs to be like so genetically intelligent, like so all that stuff. So I've had actually a couple along the way, but I've consciously chosen not to, because I'm still very much in warrior mode. Like, I'm, and that is incompatible with having a kid right now, like, or having a family right now. At some point I want to, but I'm trying to be as conscious as possible. And I think that this is like, this is a good segue probably into spiral dynamics, is like, the world is fucking walking around completely unconscious, whereas what we need is people more conscious and actually doing things because they know why they're doing them, not because they've been fucking hypnotized into making a decision.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
exactly.
Okay, spiral. So two ways we could start this. I know you primarily came through Ken Wilber. I haven't done much on Ken Wilber, but I came through more of Don Beck stuff, and I actually got introduced to spiral dynamics by Tony Robbins many years ago. So in Date with Destiny, he does a whole fucking day on spiral dynamics, and it's a really like fucking deep interactive process. And he did like stuff together with Don Beck himself, actually. So they bring it in, and for me, I remember hearing, like, I went to Date with Destiny, I think, for the first time when I was a young, dumb punk kid, man, like 21, probably. Like, I mean, look, I was, to give you an idea what I was like when I was younger, like, I ran away from home when I was 18, 19, and I came from a very, like, broken family. Parents split up when I was 12, 13. Then I grew up, I took care of my grandma until I was 16, 17. Then my uncle, who was my, basically father figure inspiration, he was a brilliant guy, but like very patriotic. Everything was about Macedonia, not fuck the rest of the world. And then I kind of broke out of that. And when I was 19, I changed my name from Stoyevsky to Svetsky, which means of the world. So it was a fuck you to like the family and all of that stuff. And so I was always idealistic, but again, a male in the early 20s is fundamentally stupid. You don't fucking know anything. You think you know everything, but you absolutely don't know nothing. And I first came across Spiral with Robbins, and what was funny was like I was naturally very orange. The kind of orange person, escapes from home, builds their own thing, does all that stuff. And I discovered like this Spiral, and I sort of viewed green as the as this is the next thing. And over the coming years, I became this full-on fucking social justice warrior hippie. Like I was a vegan, I was talking about animal rights and like all this fucking shit. And it's just funny how like I've ended up doing, I think, Date with Destiny 4 times now, and it was in the last, like, I think it was the second or probably the third time around that I did it, that I had like a bunch of aha moments that I want to get into in a minute. But I'd love to hear your story. Like that's sort of how I got into Spiral Dynamics. So it was definitely through Robbins, definitely through interaction, and then I devoured all of Don Beck stuff and Clare Graves stuff. But I actually didn't know anything about fucking Ken Wilber until about a year ago. I think Breedlove mentioned him on the podcast. So I was like, who the fuck is this guy? I was like, Spiral Dynamics? No, it's Don Beck. But then I realized, he's like done his own thing. So tell me your story about it. And then maybe what we should do after the story is maybe define the layers, the levels for people so they kind of understand it.
Yeah. So for me, it was interesting. So you're saying you came into Spiral Dynamics prior to sort of your metamorphosis into second tier consciousness, right? You were
well before. Yeah.
That's
interesting. I was a kid.
That's interesting because what I found, but yet it's still connected with you when you
Big time. Yeah.
Right, that's interesting because what I found is a lot of people, I don't know if you found this, I don't share it with that many people, right? Because I know better. If you share it with someone who's resonating at first tier consciousness, particularly greens or blues, it's a rejection. Like they're even insulted by it. You know what I'm saying? So that's interesting that you were able to connect with it. For me, I had already, according to me, right, had already sort of been at the second tier when I came into it. So it was very, very like intuitive, very easy to understand. It clicked immediately. The way I got though into it was a friend of mine actually worked with Ken Wilber for like years.
Okay.
So knows him well, worked with him. And I don't know if he had sent me the article before, The Integral Vision at the Century. Did you read that one? 2000. It was written in 2000. It's really good. It's called like Integral Vision at the Millennium, right? And he wrote it in 2000. And so when I was dealing with some of the stuff post Trump's election, like not that I cared who won, it was more like I saw society being pitted against each other in a very kind of intentional and dangerous way. And so he sent that to me. He sent me that essay. And it was like the first thing since Bitcoin that
just like made sense.
Yeah. It was like, again, I couldn't sleep for a while and I just did Spiral Dynamics for a month, right? Listening to Don Beck and YouTube interviews, Ken Wilber interviews, Ken Wilber pieces. Like he wrote this brilliant thing about Trump and like the mean green meme. It's so good. It's amazing. It was so dead on. It was so predictive. Because this framework helps you understand like what's really going on, right? So I read that, and within that article, he does brief descriptions of the different colors of the spiral, and he also talks about how it's include and transcend, and how we can go up and down the spiral, and you got to be careful, and it's not this like simple linear thing; it's complicated, just like life. But when I read that, it really just like. It was so helpful, and even now it's helpful because now I can look at people fighting and getting angry at each other and even being, I mean, this is worse than it was right in 2017. I mean, now we're like there's a significant amount of people out there who are like, if you're unvaccinated, I hope you die. Or if you're unvaccinated, I hope you shouldn't be able to fly, or like have fun staying at home if you're not, you know what I'm saying? Like it's so mean spirited. I mean, the authoritarian streak that so many people had latent inside of them now being brought out, it's scary. But like if you look at that from the framework of Spiral Dynamics, you can at least keep your sanity to some degree. And so for me, it was 2017 when I first got keyed into it, and it really just it just helped me in so many ways because I it expressed how I felt. You know, there's this one interview Ken Wilber does. It's really funny. You'd love it. It's a short clip. It's like 2 minutes. I can send it to you when we're done. But he starts talking about like what happens when you're in a room. Let's say you put a blue in a room and a red in a room and an orange.
This was in your article.
Yeah, it was in my article. Did you click on the audio though?
Yes, I did.
Wasn't
Yeah.
that great? And he talks about like how all the colors just hate each other, right? Like they despise each other. And then you have the yellow in there, and nobody really likes the yellow, right? But they don't hate him either, you know? And I thought that was funny because the yellow's sort of like the peacemaker in a way, because the yellow kind of can see, oh, there's a red, there's a blue, there's a green, and they're fighting as I would expect, right? It's sort of like you're a little bit above the fray of it all, but it's still frustrating, right?
in the exercises that so during Date with Destiny, one of the ways Tony gets the message across is so he defines the layers, which we'll do in a second, but then what he does, we get hats and passes it around to the fucking audience, and basically everyone sort of like, he's like, who is the best fucking red in this room? Like, who's the red? And, you know, you get a bunch of fucking macho guys put their hand up, I'm a fucking red. He does that. Then he goes, you know, who is the best blue? Like, who is, you know, down the line, you know, a rules person, like, you know, structure, blah, blah, blah. And you get a bunch of blue people put their hand up. Then who's orange, who's green? And then basically throws up topics and, you know, with microphones, with the fucking hats on, basically blue argues with red, argues with orange, argues with green. It's like, yeah, and you see it in real life, and it's just so fucking clear. You know what I mean? Like, I remember the last one, there was, you know, the green chick was like some vegan chick. You know, the red dude was this like big buff fucking military guy. You know, the orange dude was he was like this entrepreneurial guy. The blue guy was a religious. He was a pastor. So like, and it's just interesting to watch how, like, I mean, it's exaggerated because like the rules of the thing is to like go into state, you know, and like to bring up the red energy or the blue energy and everything. But that was like, you know, experiencing that in a, you know, live event and watching it in front of you is kind of like that 2-minute clip, but on steroids, right? It's because you see it in action. But let's take people through the levels so they sort of get an appreciation of what this is. So, you know, I mean, if you want to rattle them off, and we can sort of explain what each level kind of, what's an example of behavior in each level, or an example of the type of person each level.
Sure. So like the colors that I'll use are the ones that Ken Wilber uses in that article. There's all sorts of different ways of kind of categorizing. So I don't know if these are the exact ones that you're familiar with. Also, I'm just going to sort of give a caveat. Like, I tried to do this. I don't know if you knew this, but I did a Kaiser report interview on spiral dynamics after I started.
Oh, did you? Okay.
It was weird because it's hard to explain, man. Like, it's hard to explain. I'm going to do my best, but it's very hard. And a lot of people are just going to hear this and be like, you know, and it was like that in that interview where like Max was like, how much drugs are you taking in Colorado? Like, that was his reaction. It was very funny, but it really hammered home the point that, like, I think writing it is an easier format. But anyway, so the basic idea here is that there are these memes, right? Or there, and human beings tend to sort of, most human beings on Earth tend to fit into roughly one of these kind of memes, where that's sort of their worldview, let's say. Like, you could call it consciousness, but it's sort of almost worldview as well. Or I guess like what happens is you're at a state of consciousness, and then your worldview sort of is reflective of that consciousness, right? Let's say. So at the very base levels, like what we described, it would be beige, which is often described as like the most base instincts. So if you're resonating at beige, your primary focus in life is driven by survival, literally, like shelter, food, what your basic needs. And so you're going to respond, right, to every scenario based on that, right? I mean, you're not thinking about anything beyond it. And so you're primarily focused on that stuff. Now, that would be like what a newborn infant would be like, right? It's just going to survive at all costs. It's going to do whatever it needs to survive. It's going to scream. It's going to spit. It's going to whatever, right? It's going to try to survive without thinking, right? It's just that instinctual kind of reaction. Then the next
Yep.
one is probably
Before you do the next one, I was just gonna also mention. So the way I kind of like explain it to some people, which is sometimes a little bit easier to digest, is each layer, I don't call them levels, I call them layers, is kind of like it's got its own values framework that is, you know, that is conducive to you know, operating and perceiving the world through that thing. So it's not good or bad, it's just the different values hierarchy. And like you said in the first one, survival is the number one value. Like me, you know, it's you know, it's fundamentally egocentric in nature, and it's not a bad thing because we were all there as fucking infants.
And we could still go there, right? Like if a meteor hit outside your house, you'll be at beige tomorrow, right? I mean, you can go back. Yeah, exactly. No, and that's good. And I like layers as well. I think that's a better way to describe them. So this next one, maybe you want to chime in a little bit more after I do the basic, because this one's, I think, the hardest one to describe, really, because it's really not that common today. But it's purple according to the Wilbur sort of analysis, and it would be like mythic, and like the way he describes it would be sort of like a voodoo kind of view of the world, like spirits inhabited by spirits, and the natural world is not, you know, this complex organism, but rather sort of an ordered like punishment and reward kind of a thing. And so it's very much like hexes and curses and very superstitious driven. Like that if you do like a rain dance, you're going to get rain. Something, you know, sort of along those lines. Like there's not a, it's almost like the reason it's a little bit above the beige is because it's still focused primarily on survival. But it feels like there's an element to, you can control that survival, right? So in other words, like if I dance for rain, we'll get rain and have a good crop, something like that. So it's a little bit more awareness that it's not just like I need to survive, but I need to do these sorts of superstitions to survive. Do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, so I agree with that. I generally pursue purple as a tribal thing. So purple is tribal in nature, and here's an interesting heuristic: is when you look at the layers, you can actually reorganize the spiral dynamics, the 8 layers, and place them next to each other, where beige and purple are similar, but beige is more egocentric, purple's more ethnocentric. So it's the same fundamental value structure, but they the one is more communal, one is more individual. So purple has very similar to beige, but it's tribal. So where you would find a purple consciousness is a tribe in Africa, for example, like you said, who might rain dance thinking that they're, or what they'll do is like they'll see a rock fall and lightning strike, and the assumption is that because the rock fell, lightning strikes, so they'll start throwing rocks around so that the lightning strikes, right? So it's like I said, mythic, mystical, but it's fundamentally, for me, I think the word that resonates most with me is kind of like tribal is probably it, but like mythically tribal. So you know, there is survival is based on the tribe fucking completely sticking together, but it's still about survival. That is still the fundamental need.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's sort of like you're still resonating with the survival thing as the priority to sort of your existence, but you're looking for maybe a way to control it a little bit more, not just like scramble, but like sort of being like, oh well, the rock did this in the lightning, so therefore we're going to try to control the survival by doing something with the rock, right? Something like that. And
we're all in it together.
Yeah,
so that's where the world is. We now own like a purple world.
Right, we the tribe can do stuff to control our destiny and survive, right? You know, and we can work with one another. Yeah, so right, so red is sort of where, which is the next one. Red is sort of where the individual starts becoming supreme, right? So you're aware of yourself, and then it becomes sort of a conquer attitude. And so a lot of the, like feudalism would be a system which is very red. You have that the feudal lord who takes power and then maintains it through strength. You have the others below, and that lord can do whatever he wants. And so some of the archetypes that are associated with this would be like an out of control rock star, or like a Attila the Hun or something like this. So it's beyond the tribe. There's conquering, there's taking, there's if I can do it, I will do it. Right? If I can get more, if I, by any means necessary, sort of a thing. And from like the human development archetype, it's associated with like the terrible twos kind of mentality.
Twos, yeah.
And that would be
so,
the red level.
Yeah, like the way I view it is, or the way I learned it is the archetype is the power god. So it's the like you said, it's the rock star. It's the there's still a level of superstition, but what happens is from the tribe emerges someone who realizes that these people are thinking that the rock created the rain. So what I'm gonna do is I fucking own the rock and I'm gonna create the rain because I'm the fucking god. So and it's a natural progression from beige through to purple through to what you'll notice is the pendulum swings back to me, I.
Yeah, and it's sort of like instead of the tribe sort of cohesively working, it's a lot of people looking to a caste that's above to ensure survival, right? So
Correct.
you still care about survival and not freedom, right, or individual agency so much for most of the people, because you're giving up that agency. Well, you never really had it, right? But to a caste above, right? Yeah, it's sort of like if you were in the old days and you could predict when the eclipse would happen, you'd be all powerful, right? You're
you are the power god.
I'm going to make the sun disappear, right? And all of a sudden you're God, Yeah, so something like that. Okay, so then the next one, I think the first, just to be clear, if anyone's confused, I think what Wilbur did in 2000 is he sort of said like what percentage of the population is residing at each of these levels. And so it's very little for beige, purple, and red. I think red was the highest, and he said about 10% of the world is in red right now. So it's not a lot. Well, that was in 2000. So, but anyway, blue is where we start to get into the archetypes that everybody is familiar with, right? Like in a developed world, let's say, like in Australia or the United States, where it's very common, you see these archetypes. And so, yeah, so blue is really where like the traditional religions would sort of fit in. It's this idea, more sophisticated sort of religious view, let's say, where there's these tenets of morality. There's order, right? If you stay in line within the order, then you're people and you will prosper in this world and the next world. And there's a very and you are correct, right? Like in other words, like whoever is in that tribe with that belief has the answer, and any other belief system is wrong, right? So you would see this in essentially like people who are fundamentalists in any sort of, I think, of the big religions would be my best description.
Okay, I would argue that the fundamentalists are probably more red. So for me, the way I envision blue is order and structure, which is something that emerges out of red, because at some point what's found is that one ruler, one person being the power god is not functional. So people create structures, and so the Roman Republic was actually a good example of a blue, whereas a red would have been Genghis Khan or Attila, which is one ruler, whereas the Republic was a little bit different. So I would say governments, police, religion, any form of religion, because it's a structure. So the fundamental value of a blue is order and structure for the purpose of some sort of directionality, which for me aligns with the power god. The fundamental value is to have power, but the raison d'etre behind it is to have directionality, to emerge. Like, so you're no longer like the tribal purple is sludge. Power god emerges out of the sludge for law and order decreed by me, and then blue emerges out of that to say law and order decreed by something higher than the power god.
Yeah, no, that's a really good description. I agree with that. It's this idea that instead of that dictatorial ruler who's just decreeing stuff, that human beings can create a more sophisticated form of order that is more dispersed and also based on some sense of defined morality, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is, it's okay if we have people making decisions, but you can't cross this line, essentially, right? So it's sort of, as you're saying, it's sort of the introduction of like a more rules-based system into a person-based rule, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and again, people kind of get this wrong. Like a lot of, the idea of the state is a blue concept, right? And some people might, see this like, oh, you fucking statist. It's like, no, it's a natural emergent phenomenon coming out of red.
Yes,
we have to go through it.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I mean, yes, it would be the state itself, even, or the nation state would be a blue situation, as constructed right today. So I think hopefully people are following along, but I completely agree. I think that was very well described. And then we move on to like the orange layer. And so according to Wilbur, and I tend to agree, I mean, most people, I mean, it's not the majority, but right, like he says 40% of the world is sort of at orange, or somewhere like that, I think. But it's sort of transcending the blue order a little bit, back to the individual again. So it's not fully rejecting order, but it is saying that it is looking at too much order, too much restriction on the individual is constraining, and in some cases wrong. And so it sort of promotes, it's like the Enlightenment sort of coming in, and putting, it's sort of like, we're almost even like some of the revolutionary ideas would have come from, oh no, the computer is kind of dying. Oh, this sucks. Just so you know, it could go any moment. It's not a good time. But anyway, so it's sort of like a lot of libertarian, like libertarian kind of thought. The individual becomes transcendent again, like excellence is pursued, ambition is the highest sort of goal, and actually sort of like the global oligarchic state, and even globalism, I would say, is pretty orange.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I wonder if I'm going to need to do some more thinking whether I would agree the globalist state is orange. Maybe it is. Maybe it's like a deformed orange, because I guess each of these levels have a shadow and a light, version. So like, if we apply that lens to it. But for me, I guess the way I define orange is it's the achiever. It is the so things like science, the entrepreneur, the heretic, the scientific heretic, like a Galileo was an orange emerging out of the blue that was the church, right? The Einstein was the orange that emerged out of the traditionalist Newtonian physics. So these like the orange is that natural progression, and it's actually a thing that I've probably resonated with most throughout my life. Although I would strongly disagree with Ken Wilber's assumption that 40% of the world is that. I think 40-50% of the world is actually purple, when you think of population wise, like Africa and all that shit. Maybe in the US or Australia, one could argue there's more orange, but that's
what he might have said, like, because he did a certain percentage for the power and a certain percentage for the population. So
okay.
The power. I'm not so
that would make more sense.
But I think I just want to say before my computer dies too, is like the point you just made though is really important, and it's not something that I've dwelled on enough, and it's so crucial that there's that light side,
the shadow and the light. Yeah,
exactly. Each one of these layers has this really aspirational and evolutionary component, obviously, right? That's what this is about, consciousness evolution. But then there's that shadow side, which is the negative sort of manifestations that can come out of the meme. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So I'm sort of skewing some of my descriptions negatively, right? Because I guess I'm looking at the memes, right, from a sort of like snap out of it kind of standpoint, but you're highlighting the positive, right? The light aspects, which is important, because you're right. It's a mosaic, right? Whereas green is the perfect example of how there's a real light, there's a light, and then there's the dark, and most of them are on the dark right now. That's our problem.
So fucking true. So true. That's actually like, I don't know if you'll have time to like recharge your computer, but like the big part of the spiral dynamics discussion I want to have is about the light and dark, because no one talks about that enough. And I think that's the most important element of it. Because I had my own personal journey back into red, actually, consciously, to go and develop that for myself, because I was missing it. But anyway, let's get on to green.
I think I can, if you want to take a quick break, and I can try to actually plug my computer in somewhere else. Do you want to try to do that real quick so we can finish?
Let's do that. Okay, we're back. Green.
All right, green. Yeah. So green sort of gets from like, it's interesting because as you go through these layers, it's almost like there's the individual kind of transcends a little bit, and then back to the community, and then the right. So it's like, which makes sense because it's a balance. You know what I mean? Like a life on Earth is a balance. And so green sort of rejects the, let's say, hyper ambition maybe of the individual, and recognizes that there's some other factors that you need to take into consideration. So a good example of this would be an orange might be willing to exploit the environment in a very destructive way to make profits at all costs. And you could maybe be dumping, toxic waste into some tribal village's a lake, right? And to an orange mindset, they might say, well, you know what I mean? It's the cost of business. Like, I can do it, I'll do it. It's my ambition. Whereas sort of a green is sort of looking at things a little bit more holistically and saying, there are limits to the orange behavior. There are other things that we need to take into account, externalities, let's say. And so the idea of Earth and caring about the animals as well and the environment, and sort of seeing things not just from like a human conquering standpoint or an ambition standpoint, and a more global interrelatedness connectivity. So the light side of a green would be that, right? And it would be it would sort of be like globalism or interconnectedness as we described in a good way. But of course there's the dark side of the green as well, which maybe you want to tackle that.
I mean, yeah, I think I'll touch on later my experience as a green, because I moved my center of gravity to there in my early 20s. But yeah, like I think the green is, it's communal in nature. It's about the idea is a broader consciousness that we're all connected. We're all in this together. So it's kind of like a macro version of the purple. That's kind of how I view it. So purple is very tribal, small. Green is like we're all one tribe. And I don't know, as I've gotten a little bit older though, like, and this is where I feel like some of the spiral dynamics stuff falls apart a little bit. The framework is still strong, and this is what's reinforced my belief in the light and dark elements of each layer, is that without understanding that light and dark nuance, green basically feels and looks socialist, which is very dangerous. But the idea of knowing that it's not just me, there fundamentally is a we, and having some sort of empathy for other living things and other creatures and other things in the planet is actually a good thing, and that's sort of the lighter element. But yeah, like I said, it's the darker element of a green is this disdain for progress, this disdain for achievement, the idea that we are all in this together, and that it like a lot of the equality movement and all this other fucking shit that gets co-opted has good intentions, and this is probably one of the issues with green, is that the intention is generally like at the core pure, but it manifests in a really fucking deranged format, which is unfortunate.
Well, it is now, right? And I think that's the key, and that's one of the things that I found very useful about Ken Wilber, is his talk about the mean green meme, right? And that is what is ascendant, unfortunately, right now in the society. It's this sort of it just turns very authoritarian, to get to your goals. So in other words, it's that, and they've seemed to, unfortunately, a lot of Greens have seemed to adopt the ends justify the means framework. So it's like, yeah, you know, they may care about, you know, everybody and all living things and all that, but their obsession to get to a certain end is running right through authoritarianism. It's sort of like the perfect example of the mean green or authoritarian left at work today is the vaccine passports, right? It's this claim to care about everyone and that we're going to do whatever it takes to save everyone, but they're going to use the most totalitarian, fascist kind of way of doing it, you know, imposing it via passports, right? So it's like there's this goal that's like, a lot of them probably are honest. They do want everyone to be healthy, but they're willing to get authoritarian and not be able to see how evil they're being in order to get there. And so,
yeah, I mean, would you agree that that's maybe a green that's been so it's a dark, it's the dark element of the green, but that's also been influenced by blue in a sense. So
yeah,
it's like an aqua maybe.
Well, I was even going to say when you said the green was sort of like purple, right? I actually was thinking blue as well, right? Because it's also
very much.
It's almost like they skip a little, right, with the community.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that's the issue there. There's a lot of good side to it, right? If you do it right, but if you do it wrong, of course, you have a problem. The other thing is, as we mentioned earlier, which is the hostility of green to excellence, right? Or individual excellence. They don't want to admit it almost, right? It's like, it can't be true. And so therefore everyone sort of has to conform. So there's this, one of the dark sides about the green is a insistence on conformity. And it also applies to all the other first tier layers, of course, as you know, because they all think that they're right. So green, of course, thinks that everyone on the other layers that they can recognize, they're all crazy and barbarians, right? And they're the enlightened ones over at green. But then they want to use authoritarianism to bring everyone to their enlightened green state. And that's the dark side. And that's actually a lot of what we're dealing with right now. It's almost like this, it's funny, the way I would describe it is it's like the orange ones are the ones really pulling the strings, right? But they're using the greens. The greens are sort of like useful idiots in the spiral.
Yeah, it really is. They yes, exactly.
And that's unfortunate. So yellow, as I mentioned on the break, I did want to just read this. I think it's from a website, a spiral dynamics website in the Netherlands. And I thought it was a very helpful description of yellow. And yellow is hard to describe because it's that giant leap that Clare Graves talks about. It's that quantum sort of, it's not just a small kind of move. It's like a truly transformative kind of shift in your own personal, let's say, framework or paradigm. So this is how they describe it. So it says, firstly, he noticed that a yellow-oriented lifestyle is much more free than a lifestyle in any of the other value systems. Yellow-oriented people seem to move and express themselves completely free and independent of their life environment. Contrary to people in other value systems, they were not afraid anymore to be rejected, and they didn't fear other people's or God's judgment. They didn't show the need to make an impression on others and to reach the top at the cost of everything. They also didn't strive anymore for absolute truths, and they didn't have the need to belong to something anymore. In short, these were people without irrational fears, compulsive needs, and compulsive behaviors. However, yellow freedom doesn't mean that people in the yellow value system are not connected to their environment. On the contrary, yellow-oriented people are very much involved and show a lot of compassion. The biggest difference with people from other value systems is that their life environment is not fearfully or compulsively leading them.
Yeah, I think I read that. Was that in your one of your articles?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember reading that. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree. Like, I think the way I mean, do you want to add anything to the yellow thing or?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is what I think characterizes a yellow is less judgment, but awareness. So in other words, you can sort of see other people in other memes fighting and bickering. And you can even say, I agree with a little bit of that guy, and I agree with a little bit of this guy. But neither one of them is what I believe. is, so in other words, I think what a yellow does, because you include and transcend as you move up the spiral, I think what a yellow sort of does is able to look at all the other memes that came before and say they're all valuable in their own way, right? Like, I'm a little bit purple, I'm a little bit blue, I'm a little bit green, I'm a little bit orange, and I'm a little bit, red. And they're all part of what makes me up. And life's complicated that way. Whereas
Thank you.
Whereas I think people that are really attached to one meme are convinced, are sold on that meme. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they're rejecting the other things. So an orange doesn't look at a blue and say, there's a little bit of blue in me, or blue is important, blue is useful, right? They say blue is barbaric and stupid, right? And you know what I mean? So that's, I think, the biggest difference, I would say, between second tier consciousness and first tier consciousness, is the second tier consciousness understands that they are comprised of the whole mosaic and they're accepting of that.
Perfect. I think that's exactly where I was going to add my piece, is that not only does the yellow realize that yellow is all the other layers, but I think just as importantly is the yellow can take and behave in the energy of a specific layer with in a context dependent manner. So the argument I always use is that if you're in a house that's burning down and you decide to be in green, well, you're all gonna fucking die. What you need to do is you need to turn the red on. You need to get the fucking chair. You need to throw it out the fucking window. You need to become the dictator and get everyone out of the fucking house.
Right.
So you need to be able to fall into the energy of the red without becoming a totalitarian red. And that's what the yellow does, is able to move all the way up and down the spiral as needed. And I think that's the piece. So it's not only that they realize that they're all of it, but that they can actively exist context dependent in a particular state or in a particular energy or a particular values framework. And that was the aha moment that I got. And it took me, I think, probably 2 or 3 times of going to the Date with Destiny events and really immersing into Spiral to really fucking get that viscerally instead of just intellectually. And that's why I think yellow is, it's what lies beyond the great filter. And I think, in many ways, I personally think I'm an aspirational yellow. I don't think I don't know if anyone in the world is actually yellow. I think we all, generally fuck around in the other things, and our center of gravity is there. I think there's probably, a handful of people in the world who actually their center of gravity is actually yellow, and they are able to context dependent, take an energy of a particular level and live it, be it, and move on without an attachment.
Yeah, so good point. This actually goes back to, I think one of the reasons that a lot of people struggle with localism, right, and accepting it, as we discussed before, have a lot of different municipalities and diversity. And I think the reason a lot of people struggle with diversity is precisely because they're resonating at first tier memes, because it's a threat. Okay, if you have a lot of other people who are, if you want a blue lifestyle, okay, and maybe your community wants a blue kind of lifestyle, right? You might be threatened by other people wanting a green lifestyle. And the reason you're threatened, though, by it is because we demand that everyone conform at this level of the United States, right? Which is back to the craziness we discussed. And I think someone that's more resonating within the yellow layer is going to be very much more comfortable with localism, because they can say, right, and be fine with different communities doing things totally differently than they would want to do it. And a lot of people struggle with that. They really, really do. A lot of people don't want other people, for example, to do drugs because they think it's no good or it's not good for them, right? For some people, doing a ton of psychedelics isn't good, right? I mean, it's not
Mhm.
going to be good for them. They're not ready. They're not in this space where it's good, and they shouldn't, right? You know, plenty of people like that. I do too. Okay, it's in fact it might be the majority.
Mhm.
But for a lot of people, it's life changing and extremely valuable, and it's just that's the diversity. And so being able to understand, it's so important for us, I think, to evolve as a species, really, is to be able to accept difference, and not demand conformity. And it's crazy how much we are now in a world where it's normal to try to pressure, and now it's not just pressure, right? It's like literally saying, if you don't, like New York City is saying, is if you don't take this medical treatment that's experimental, right, that you probably don't need at all, you can't go into a restaurant. I mean, can you believe this? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Like that's where we're at. And this is a perfect example of absolutist type thinking, and lack of diversity. And that's why I do believe, um, that we won't have a sustainable, better planet, right? So we both talked about after this decade, hopefully having a much more, let's say, different paradigm, okay? Without enough people, I think, resonating more on the yellow and beyond, I don't think it's sustainable, right? Because anything we build will be fragile, right? Because it's not rooted in a true understanding. So to me, it's like but I've sort of always been this way, as far as like, I've never understood people that feel a certain way passionately about how they want to live, that need other people to see it that way. I've never
Mhm.
understood that. But a lot of people are like that. It's strange to me.
Yeah, interesting. Um, let's touch on the last two levels, which I mean, view them as like more theoretical than practical, but
Right.
you've got,
Because
yeah, like what is it?
I'm not resonating
Yeah,
on those, so I can't even
yeah.
describe.
So there's like what,
You go for it.
turquoise and coral, right? Yeah. So
Right. So
turquoise. Maybe you go turquoise
right,
quickly, and then I'll try coral.
please, man, you take these ones, because they're I'm not I don't know if I've ever like had many. Maybe if I'm on like some sort of substance, I could be turquoise for a second.
Yeah. Well, that's I think you just defined it. Is like the idea of turquoise is like a deep connectedness with everything. And I think like a psychedelic experience might be an example of turquoise existence. Now, again, the older I've gotten, the more practical I've become, the more I've realized that maybe that's not a state that humanity can actually achieve or strive for, but it's an intermittent state perhaps that we can achieve through like deep meditation, like an understanding of oneness and connectedness to everything. But yeah, that's sort of the premise of turquoise, as far as I understand. I mean, hey, I could be wrong. Maybe as Bitcoin, the great filter that is Bitcoin, sort of we move through and more of the world becomes yellow. Maybe that is what we transcend into. But yeah, at this point it's like purely conjecture. And then I'm not even sure what the fuck is coral. What's the difference between coral and turquoise?
No, like I'm not the guy on this one. So the
Okay.
reason why, and I'll explain it, is that I feel like the reason why, a lot of times people like have trouble with spiral dynamics is maybe because they haven't had much time in even the yellow, and so
Mm,
the problem is, so if I read a description of turquoise or even coral, right, my mind starts to go sort of like, I kind of see what you're saying, but I've been there so infrequently that I can't really attest to it too well. But I think you made a good point. So for those out there who've had psychedelic experiences, let's say, right, like the ego break, like the real total ego break, yeah, it'd be something like that. And I do think the types of people that have resonated on that kind of level of consciousness, I think it's so rare that they're remembered as sort of like religious gurus, essentially. It's
mm.
those types of, maybe Jesus was one of them, but Buddha, right? I mean, they've transcended to such a place and are able to, maybe it's through meditation, right? Because clearly, like, meditation is a practice that survived for thousands of years because it does something, right? I mean, it changes your consciousness for a period at least. And I guess people who are truly practitioners of meditation on a very intense level, I mean, if you read what they say about, they tend not to even want to discuss like what's really going on in intense meditation. And I can understand that, because like, even if I do a float, have you ever done the isolation tanks, those floats, right?
Many times, yeah.
You go places, right? You know? And so like, that's a meditation practice, right? In a way. And so I do think we could get there, but I agree with you in the sense that it's such a leap from like where we are, that will we ever see that in our lifetime? I mean, I'd love to see it. I'd love to myself, experience that kind of state more, right, on a more regular basis than I have in my life so far. But
perhaps maybe what makes it special, sorry to interject, maybe what makes it special is that it is intermittent and rare.
Right. Yeah, so, exactly. And perhaps even like getting to that place, even if it's intermittent, helps you in general understand the spiral better. You don't have to be there all the time, but just knowing that it's there might allow you to sort of have a gut check on your higher self sometimes. So you're like resonating, let's say, on some other layers, but you know that you could be that person, right? You know it's in you, essentially. Yeah. So maybe that helps keep you grounded to some degree. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, for me, for humans to be, I mean, it's almost like the monks, or maybe, some like real high level like monks are resonating. But I think the problem, right? The thing is, if you're really resonating on that sort of a layer, most of the time, I sort of feel like you're going to be a monk. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of that's your
Frontal
answer.
dive starvation. Yeah, exactly. The world doesn't work like that.
No, it certainly doesn't now, right? I mean, maybe in 500 years, right? Like the world is such a different place in the material, but the way
perhaps we've maybe we've automated everything else to the point where it's
like floating in the sky, right? Like who knows? But like in this materium, right? Like in the material world that we exist in, as of now, I mean, it would take such a gigantic. I mean, the world would be so different that we couldn't comprehend it, right? So who knows, right? Maybe one day.
And I guess that's part of that paradigmatic shift, is that like you said, it's inconceivable. It's just a conjecture. So I mean, one thing I thought of as you were talking is like, one way for people to think about, like, there's a relationship even between like this, turquoise and blue, is that like if the archetype of turquoise was like a Jesus, the archetype of blue is the religions that emerged as a result of the teachings of Jesus, right? So there's a difference there, right? So it's not like that religion is turquoise. Religion is a blue construct. It's an adaptation.
Right, and I've always felt this way, which is like the true religious masters that religions have been formed on over the times, like they did have some enlightenment. But human beings that were so incapable of truly processing the message created structures that they were more familiar with, right? So like around Jesus, or the message of Jesus, or the message of Buddha, you formed those traditional blue structures that actually don't really fit the message, but it's all we knew how to do, right? It's all so it's like the message, it's like that weird dichotomy where it's like the message at the root. Like if I read any like religious prophet from any religion, like if I would read their actual words, I would just be like, yeah, like that, I agree, right? But then humans corrupt the message, and then they use it for power purposes, right? I mean, of course, like we described earlier, it's like if there's a real message here, and then I can build an edifice like the cathedral, right? Like to use the Curtis Yarvin. Are you familiar with him at all? Moldbug, Curtis Yarvin?
Yes. Mencius Moldbug is a fucking legend. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's his real name, is Curtis Yarvin.
Anyway,
so he talks about the cathedral, right? So you're building, like, you're taking a real spiritual message, and then you're building the cathedral around it to control the message and to control the people. It's complicated, right?
Yep. So okay, so I wanna throw this one at you. So, when I first came across spiral dynamics, so I'm a young kid, and I kind of mentioned this before, is like I was very orange and that was my values hierarchy was all about achievement. You know, whether it was physical, mental, spiritual, like economic in nature, like all of that. I was all about achievement, being the best, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think from an analytical standpoint, like looking at it as something that individuals need to go through. So the values hierarchy of an individual, not at a societal level. So bringing it back down to the individual level. What you end up doing, like the detriment of loading one form of values hierarchies at the exception of all others, is that you burn yourself out in some way, shape, or form, right? You become a kind of you know, that Egyptian bodybuilder who puts synthol in his biceps and, you know, has the biggest arms in the world. You know, he's got 40-inch biceps, but he's got fucking chicken legs, and, you know, like it's a deformity, right?
Yep.
And for me, what like looking back on my journey, so the first time I came across spiral dynamics, I was super fucking orange, and I discovered green, as I mentioned, and I thought that was the next level. So over time, I became like total like vegan, social justice warrior, fucking, you know, total green. And I saw the merit in it. And I guess I was more light green in that sense. Like I never, like I was still an achiever. There was a still like, you know, orange predisposition in me. But, you know, I went through a phase where I, you know, closed down my businesses. I wanted to get out of that. I wanted to like sing Kumbaya. I never went down like the path of psychedelics or drugs or anything like that. I didn't drink alcohol, but, you know, I kind of like became a greenie, and you know, the pendulum really swung there. And what was interesting was that the second or third time I did some deep spiral work was I realized that I had a natural aversion to, in particular, blue and red. So I had a natural aversion to blue because of my strong orangeness. And I had a natural aversion to red because at a young age, my dad was extremely red and very like dark red, you know, like overly masculine, beat the shit out of us, beat the shit out of my mom, beat the shit out of fucking everyone. And uncontrolled, you know, masculine basically. And what I figured was that I hadn't developed my own red. I was a fucking pussy. I was a pleaser. I was a pussy. I was, you know, like I was extraordinarily bad with fucking girls, like all that sort of stuff. Like I hadn't developed the masculine component of me. So I, you know, without thinking that I needed to go to yellow, what I did was I actually actively brought myself down to red to build that piece of me.
Yeah.
Like I became a motherfucker. I became like a fucking angry son of a bitch. But like I had to go into the dark elements of red.
Or was that an intentional thing? Okay.
It was an intentional thing. I went into the dark and the light part of red to build that energy, because what I recognized was that without that, like, and this is where I think people fuck up with spiral dynamics, and why I like to think of it in layers instead of levels, is if you think you can get from, you know, if your behavior is more red and you think you can be green tomorrow, you're missing structure, you're missing achievement, and you're going to fucking crumble. You will naturally fall straight back down.
Maybe that's what happens to a lot of the greens, actually. They try
100%.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Exactly. That's exactly what they do. And that was the thing that hit me, because I was an exact version of a green that was like getting angry about how fucked up the world was, and I was behaving red.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
No, I was just going to finish with like, I spent, you know, a while redeveloping that red. And then what I realized as well was I was super weak in blue, because there was a point in my life where I, you know, understood discipline and all of that, but I never really embodied it. So I went back and started, you know, practicing discipline, because the energy of blue, so the outcome of blue is structure and order, but the energy of blue is discipline. And you know, the energy, so the outcome of red is, you know, power, God, ownership, leadership, power, etc. But the energy is you know, strength or courage or like, force,
Yep.
which you can't fucking have the other layers without that.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
anyway.
So no, it's a great point. And like, I'll go into a little bit of my own sort of history and how I see it. And then maybe you can wrap up, and because I'm going to have to do some errands here. Like, but okay.
Sure.
So my little thing, which I'm very fortunate for, this was lucky. And so I was full on orange from college to me leaving Wall Street. Okay. So, and that's an orange environment, right? I mean, if there is one, right? And so,
Yeah.
so what happened with me was I had a lot to prove to my ego, right? My ego was I had a big ego, right? I kind of always did, but it wasn't confirmed, right? So as a 22-year-old, like I thought pretty highly of myself, but the outside world hadn't confirmed what I thought of myself. So I was on this mission to sort of prove to everybody that I was as good as I thought I was, right? And so I thought that I could prove that by going into finance and making a lot of money at a young age and excelling and stuff. And I was even doing work that like it was like drudgery for the first 5 years, right? It was like all accounting, modeling. It was horrible drudgery, but I did it just because I wanted to prove that I could. I wanted to prove it to myself and everyone else around me. And it's such an orange mindset, really, And I was doing it, and I was totally resonating. That is interesting though, because I was, there was some more green in me in college, let's say, and I just totally shoved so much of that aside to be full orange, and from what you described, it's the same thing. Now I got a bailout, like literally, like my spiral journey, I got bailed out luckily. And I've told this story a lot, but what happened to me, and this is what allowed me to sort of like, it shook me to my core, was the financial crisis. Okay. Because going into that crisis, I was full on trying to get all of that materialism, right? That's how I judged myself. I judged myself based on my bonus, based on my trading calls, based on how well I was doing at work. That was literally like all the validation that I was getting in my life and proving to my ego that I was special was through those rewards, right? And then the crisis happened. And it was like the best and worst thing to ever happen. It was the best though, because when I saw the response, right, and I saw the true underbelly of the system, I had to be on. I could have done two things, right? One, I could have ignored it and kept going, or two, which is what happened to me, is I realized that the only reason my ego was being pampered, right, in the way it was because I was close to the money spigot. Right. And so, yes, I was good at my job. Yes, I'm an intelligent person. But the reason I'm making all this money isn't because I'm special. It's because I'm close to the Fed's money spigot because I work on Wall Street. And I realized that. And then I realized that the bailouts was all to just give money back to people like me. And it totally helped me crush a portion of my ego. And it allowed me to say, I'm done. Right. I have nothing left to prove anymore in that sense. And that was like the biggest gift that's ever been given to me. And the last 10 years since I left have been, trust me, there've been tons of challenges, and I've been up and down and made tons of mistakes and whatever, right? We're all growing. But that was still the best gift because it allowed me to step off the hamster wheel. Whereas what I always say to people, it's like so many people are like, yeah, I want fuck you money. And then they don't say fuck you. And it's like, that's the hamster wheel, right? So you're on orange forever. And I can't tell you how many people, how many people I know like on Wall Street to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go in, I'm going to retire at 35 or 40, and then I'm going to do this, right? And guess what? They don't. You know what I mean? They're on the wheel and they stay and they stay. And it's the same way that you're like, you have all these billionaire hedge fund managers that have more money than they could ever spend, and they can do all sorts of other interesting things, but they're not interesting enough to do it, right? They're not interesting enough people to actually get off that wheel and do something different because that's their addiction, right? They're addicted to orange. They're addicted to ego. And so like, luckily I was able to consciously, sort of like you consciously went back to sort of revisit some other layers. I was able to sort of consciously step out of my orange and then not know, I never heard of spiral dynamics at this point, but I was able to consciously step out of orange and be like, step into something else, right? I don't know what that something was, but it wasn't that same thing anymore. And so that was like, it's a good example of how sometimes, you said this yourself, right? Like adversity, right, and shock is what leads to growth a lot of time. And so that was my shock, right? That the crisis and the response was like, literally, it destroyed my worldview at the time. Because my worldview had been, I'm excellent, I'm good at this, Wall Street's awesome, I'm so smart, I'm so amazing, that's why I'm getting all this money, right? I was such a cocky little shit, you know? And the blessing was that it allowed me to like, it was like a bucket of cold water in my face. Just being like, no, you're not. You know what I'm saying? You're not special. You know, it's because the system's corrupt. And so anyway, that was seriously like the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can resonate, except that I wasn't on Wall Street. I was in a little shitty 1-bedroom apartment trading the stock market, and you know, got completely fucking wiped in 2007, and then managed to like dig myself into a bunch of debt, and that actually is what started my entrepreneurial journey. So I didn't, that for me, the because I guess I'm younger than you, so 2007 I was 20, so that turned me into even more of an orange. But
Right.
the stupidity of it actually, I think, planted the seeds for the development of the green element of me, and then that's kind of how my life went. So I was like overly orange, then I became overly green, and I had this like overly developed orange and greenness about me. And as I was younger, I mean, you know, we all develop beige and purple. Many people don't fucking go beyond purple. And what I realized was I had a big gap in both red and blue. And I think this is where the spiral dynamics model is very helpful, is that people need to go and develop those layers of themselves, those layers of consciousness, and extract the energy that's important from the consciousness, not the behavior, but the energy. And there's a very different thing. Like, you know, you can't be yellow, you can't be a true yellow, for example, if you don't know how to behave red when it's needed.
Yes.
You know, like you can't, like the red is the fucking protector. Like honestly, if you don't have a fucking red, you will end up being a cuck, like, you know, what most of New York is, for example. So like Texas is a very red state, and not just because it's conservative, but people here have the red values hierarchy naturally, and you can't. It's very difficult to fight with that. So, you know, I think the energetic element of the spiral dynamics, which, I mean, I don't know if Ken talks about this much, but I haven't seen you know, Don Beck or anyone talk about this. I think Robbins talks about it quite well. He articulates it better than anyone that I've seen. Is the essence of the layer. If you can extract those and you can, you know, embody those, you start to become an integrated human being, which is effectively my definition of a yellow.
Yeah, and like, and so the interesting thing was, to your point of what you're saying, like, if I hadn't gone full on orange like a psychopath, I would not have grown at all. I mean, I had to go through that. I had to plow through that. My ego demanded it. My growth demanded it, right? It's like, you can't, just like, I don't look at turquoise and say, oh man, like I'm going to be turquoise one day. I'm like, nah, like I'm just going to do the best I can here. You know, it's not up to me. You know, if I evolve further, if I devolve, like it's being aware, right? It's sort of just being aware of all the stuff, and not falling in the pitfalls though as well, you know, and also recognizing when the dark side of something happens to you too, you know. And one of the things that's interesting, like from being a parent, I find it, and actually I want to apply it more consciously than I am. It's a great framework to use, because as a parent, you're dealing with a child, right? That's going from infancy to teenager and then whatever. I mean, we're not there yet for us, but the point is, you're dealing with an individual, a soul that's going through all sorts of crazy changes. And as a parent, sometimes you've got to be a little red. Sometimes you've got to be a little blue. Sometimes you've got to be a little orange. Sometimes you got to be a little green, right? And it's like, if you overdo it on any of them as a parent, you're gonna see like problems. Like for my wife and I, we try. I mean, our philosophy basically is like, we're not trying to impose too much on them as individuals. We see them as each being all being unique individuals, and we want to see sort of how they, right, what their energy is gravitating to, and then helping them, right, being a guide, right. And sometimes that can lead to being a little bit, giving them a little bit too much rope to hang themselves, you know, and you do have to then come in with the blue. You know, you need to establish a little bit of order. And it doesn't mean, right, that 24/7 you're blue, but sometimes you need some blue, you know, in this household. So it's very useful. That's what I really, I hope like people that watch this come away from, is not so much obsessing about where they are or where they want to be on the spiral. I mean, it's like, we're just all talking trash here anyway, right? It's about the framework. And it's about seeing these different memes and these different parts of who you are and who you can be as a human, and applying them in the proper way, and also trying to stay away from the dark elements of them, and using the, when you do need to go into red, right, do the light red, because you don't want to be doing dark red on your family, right, ever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can get very toxic. So my dad was an example of someone who was an uncontrolled red, you know, whereas, you know, sometimes, and the thing is, it's difficult as a human being, because, like, you know, the like energy flows through us all, and, you know, it's very hard to harness, right? So sometimes I do get, you know, pretty brutal red. Like, I don't go around beating people up, but, you know, on Twitter I beat people up, and, you know, like, but, you know, I know how to.
It's easy to be red on Twitter.
It really is. It really is. And it's such an interesting, you know, to watch Twitter through a spiral dynamics lens. It's fucking hilarious. But you know, I try and, you know, cultivate a healthy red, and use it when it's important. And like, I would argue that in the world we live in today, like, one of the most underdeveloped pieces actually in a lot of people is a conscious red, because people are becoming sheeple instead of people, and that ability to push back and say no, to draw a fucking boundary, is severely lacking.
It's a great point. And actually, I've never really thought of it in terms of spiral dynamics, but I'm glad you brought it up, because then I actually have to run. But you're right. One of the things I think is most lacking in this world is courage, right? And courage really is a red attribute, in a sense, individual courage, right? In the sense that a lot of these conquerors, as, you know, messed up as like Attila the Hun was, I mean, if you wanted to say something that he had, it was a sack, right? I mean, like, you know, he's willing to put it on the line. Now, his goals that he was trying to get to weren't good, but just that, like, you know what? This is the line. Like, so for example, this would be a good example, I think, of me activating red, what I've been saying lately, which is, it's my red line, right? Like, I'm like, this red is perfect. Like, I won't take the vaccine, right? I mean, if I change my mind at some point, I want to, fine. But right now I don't want to, and you're not going to get me to take it, period. Like, you're going to have to pin me down, okay? That, I've never said that before about anything, okay? And that is an example, I think, of what you're saying, which is the light red, which is being willing to say, not being a coward, being willing to step up and say, I'm going to make you physically hold me down and shove a syringe in me. You going to do that? Right? Let's, you know what I mean? Like, if that's where you're going, let's see your true colors. Right? So anyway, that's a great, like, place to sort of finish, I think, because you're right. Exactly. Sometimes you need to throw some red out there. And I've thrown a little bit of it out there. And, you know, you also have to be careful, right? Like, you don't want to turn into it's like the Nietzsche quote, right?
The tyrant.
Like, into the monster either. So it's sort of, that's why you want to focus on the light aspects of these layers.
Yeah. All right, brother. Thank you so much for staying back on this one. Really appreciate it. That was a fantastic conversation. I had a feeling it would be this kind of conversation, and this is the kind of shit I love to do. Like, you know, there's, you know, Bitcoin is integral for me, but like, there's the breadth of these kind of conversations is really important, man. So
Yeah, totally.
I really
Man.
appreciate
I
it.
agree. I can't do this with too many people. So
Yeah, it's super rare. It really is. It
Enough
really
to
is.
do
Where can people quickly find you? Just if you want to give yourself a quick plug. And I don't know if you're doing anything other than Liberty Blitz. I think you said you were going to do something else.
Yeah, so quick on that. Like, I wrote at my Liberty Blitzkrieg site for almost a decade. I mean, hundreds, probably thousands of posts. I mean, if people want to check out, I would say the last 3 or 4 years of my posts, if you want to go through my website, libertyblitzkrieg.com. I shut it down last July. It's still all available. And I wrote one piece since. So you'll see that at the top. It's called Cancel Yourself. But I'm taking a break from writing for a lot of different reasons. At some point, I already have a concept for my new website, but it's not time, right? Like, there's a fight. Like, we're literally, to me, at war right now, right?
Yep.
And I don't want to like encourage people to get all like crazy because of that, but I do think that there is a war. I think that the power structure is at war with the population. I think we need to be honest about that, and be smart and be conscious, right? Not be stupid or like lashing out in violence. Is just not going to get us to where we need to go. But in any event, so that's why I'm not writing, but I've been very active on Twitter because I feel like I'm effective there and I don't have to sit down for a couple of hours and write a piece. I can just shoot them off while I'm picking cucumbers, right? So anyway, so like, I'm even taking like a few day break from Twitter because I got stuff to take care of. But at Liberty Blitz is my Twitter, libertyblitzkrieg.com. If you want to read my stuff on spiral dynamics, localism, etc., check it out. That's it.
Absolutely. All right, my man. Thank you so much, brother. Take care of yourself.
Thanks,
and
man.
We'll be in touch.
Talk soon.